Okay, good evening, everyone, and welcome to our Monday, February 1st meeting of the Albany Common Council. It's our caucus prior to our main meeting. Uh, Mr. Pichardo, will you just kind of call out who's here?
Sure. Present with us is Councilman O'Brien, Councilman Hoey, Councilman Farrell, Councilman Ballerin, Councilwoman Frederick, Councilman Conti, Councilman Flynn, Councilman Johnson, Councilwoman Fahey, President Ellis, President Pro Tem Kelly Kimbrough, Chief Hawkins is present with us, Commissioner of Water, Mr. Simcoe is here. From the staff, Joyce Love is joining, Councilwoman Love is joining us. From the staff is myself, Michelle Andre, Senior Legislative Aide, City Clerk Daniel Gillespie, and a Senior Assistant Corporation Counsel Brett Williams.
Okay, thank you. I know we have a lot of stuff that we got to get through tonight. I've had a conversation with Chief Hawkins about the recent violence, and after my conversation, I felt we should, because we have a public safety meeting next week, but it made sense to just to get him in here to just have a conversation with us about the recent violence. This isn't meant to be an in-depth, question and answer. It's just, kind of figuring out where we are. So with that, Chief, I'll turn it over to you.
All right. Well, thank you, Councilman Kimbrough, and good evening, everybody. And I'll be brief because you guys have a whole nother agenda after this, and I want to open it up for questions also. But I'll start with the most recent violence that we had, and that was the shooting that we had over the weekend. And as you've heard, we had a young lady who was shot and killed, and 4 others that were shot. And information that we're getting right now is that there was some sort of gathering that night, and somehow our officers were summoned to that location. It wasn't the place where the shooting actually occurred, but it was a few buildings over. Officers somehow found out about that, went to that location, broke up that gathering, and issued violations, including some code violations that were in relation to that gathering. And after the officers left the scene, and as the people were dispersing from that scene, we later learned that many of the people who were at that gathering went to another building which was nearby, and that is where, in fact, the shooting occurred. And right now, everything is preliminary. From what we understand, there were at least 2 individuals, maybe 3, who were shooting at each other inside of that room in that building. The room was set up as some sort of bar / nightclub kind of setup. And right now we're trying to figure out who the players are and figure out the people who were injured, if they had any role in this, or if they were just simply innocent bystanders who were caught in the crossfire. And so we're still tracking down some leads. We are getting some cooperation from the community. Not a lot of video and any other technology that's helping us out with this. But we do have a few leads to get started with. But from what I've been told, what this is, it involves some extremely violent young men in our community who have some sort of, we don't know if this is a beef or some, whatever is going on with these young men, with these groups of young men. We haven't really found out exactly what the source of this is. But these extremely violent and reckless young men were responsible for what we saw, for what happened over the weekend in that place. And so I'm fairly confident that we are going to find out who the players are, and we'll bring those individuals to justice. As it pertains to, earlier this year, we had a homicide earlier in the year, and we still have some, I think that was in the Hamilton and I think Ontario area, if I'm not mistaken. And so we have some leads in that one as well, and it's fairly promising in terms of the investigation with that. Last year, we took over 100 guns off the street. We had 16 homicides, and of those 16, 9 of those 16, we have individuals in custody. For another 5, we know who they are. And we're actively building cases against them. And we've got 2 remaining that we're close, but we're not quite ready to say that we know who the suspects are in those. And so I simply say that to say that, you know, the investigators and the officers are doing a great job of investigating these crimes, sending a message when these things are happening, taking guns off the street, and doing it safely. You know, there's a narrative sometimes that we hear that that you have police officers who are just waiting for an opportunity to gun down young men in our communities. Well, that's far from the truth. We've had, again, over 100 guns taken off our streets. And in most of those cases, those guns were in the possession of a person when they were taken off the street. And these officers are doing this, they're doing it in a safe way, and they're doing it in a way that's keeping our community safe. So I'll leave it there. I know there's questions, and I know you guys have more of an agenda, so I'll take any questions that you have.
Mr. Ballerin?
Thank you, Chief, and thank you for taking the time to meet with us today.
You're welcome.
Do you have any more information about the motives for this homicide and the one on Ontario and Hamilton? Because that one was very much execution style, with over 17 shots fired. Do you have motives that you're able to share with us to give us a better understanding of what's motivating these individuals to take such violent actions?
Some of it is drug related. Some of it is past grievances that they've had with some of these individuals. But an important point is which you brought up. In the overwhelming majority of the cases that we've seen with gun violence in the community, the individuals were specifically targeted. And you're right. I think you may even use the word executed, because that's exactly what we're seeing. I mean, these are targeted executions of young men in our community by usually other young men. And again, sometimes it's drugs, sometimes it's they had some feud that either just started, sometimes the feud goes back years. Sometimes it's just some nonsensical things. A perceived slight can trigger this sort of violence that we're seeing. And so we're continuing to work with other parts of our community to help our young men resolve these conflicts in a more peaceful, nonviolent way, because that's what they are. They're disputes that are escalating to this just horrendous and destructive violence that we're seeing.
Okay, thank you, Chief. Mr. Johnson?
Chief, good evening.
Good evening.
Before I ask this question, I just want to make sure I clear the air. I am not pointing the fingers at APD, but my question goes like this. We're in a time when socially distance is the conversation. And so on patrols, when we have patrols, wouldn't it be noticeable if we're having large groups in an area? Wouldn't these police officers see the large groups and become inquisitive in terms of the large gatherings? So I guess my question is, shouldn't the normal beats and shouldn't an officer be able to notice that it's a lot of people in one particular place? Shouldn't that draw someone's attention?
Yes, sir, Councilman, and in many cases, that's what they're doing. Right now, I'm having somebody from our Crime Analysis Center in conjunction with, in all likelihood, our codes department, document and pull forth the data that shows the interventions that the police officers are having with specifically groups that you're describing in our community. Because there's been many that we've broken up, and it's hard to, when you're talking about a negative, it's hard to talk about that. It's hard to say how many instances of violence we prevented simply by doing some of those things that people never even heard about. Because in many cases, they will break those groups up. They will have a presence and cause the groups to disperse. And there's no way to quantify how much violence was prevented by those. But the other part of that, Councilman Johnson, is that we've got to be careful, when we're having these sort of interactions in our communities also, because yes, I mean, if there's some clear violations of social distance regulations and things like that, then they should be interceding and having some sort of intervention. But we've got to be careful that we're not having unnecessary and disparate interactions with certain members of our community. And we're certainly aware of that piece as well. So it's a balance in terms of how we're addressing this, but certainly if there are some obvious groups of individuals who are violating regulations, officers are, in general, intervening and causing these groups to disperse.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Ms. Fahey?
Thank you, Chief. Just a quick question: were these particular establishments where this violence occurred, and is that, is it an ongoing thing at any particular establishment there where the problems occurred?
Yeah, no, this, from what I understand, the place where we had the violence over the weekend was not a habitual problem. It sounds like it was kind of a spontaneous gathering that they just saw an opportunity at this place. So that one in particular was not a habitual problem.
And then you said that they went down the street to another establishment, another bar?
Yeah, it started off in one place. Officers intervened and dispersed that crowd, issued violations. And I'm not sure exactly what the violations were, but it was some violations in relation to the gathering that was being held. And the individuals from that gathering went to another place, unbeknownst to the officers. And in the place that they ultimately ended up at, which was where the shooting occurred, was not a place that was known to us as a habitual problem.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr. Conti?
Yeah, thank you, Chief, for being here tonight. Can you clarify, did this occur at a business, or was it a private residence or an apartment?
I have to get more information, Councilman, on exactly what type of place it was. I don't have enough information right now to give you a definitive answer on that.
Okay, and I'm correct, there have been no arrests at this point. You're still working on the investigation.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Ms. Love?
Yes, thank you, Chief. Thank you for coming tonight.
You're welcome.
It was told to me earlier today, well, I'm working with the guy. It was a private club. It was used to be a juice bar. He shut it down, and he just used it as a private club. That was told to me. I'm working with I'm working with him right now. So just want to, clarify that it was a private club.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Ms. Love. Mr. Anani?
Thank you, Chief, for the update and promptly briefing us on what's happening in our city. Last council meeting, I talked about what we're witnessing in the city. And we have to stop the bleeding, right? Many people, and I spoke to you about this on many instances where individuals want to see more police presence, right? And some people are even asking for anti-loitering legislation. But what we're witnessing in this city is individuals are being shot execution style, 18, 15 times, individuals being paralyzed. What are some of the challenges that the police department is having to stopping this violence? And I know it's not just the police department's sole responsibility, but what can the common council members do? What can stakeholders in the community do to eradicate some of the violence, the gruesome violence that we're witnessing in the city of Albany? I mean, somebody being shot 18 times in a car in the city of Albany. I still have nightmares about that, and particularly when you know is close to where you reside. So I just think about all the shooting that's occurring in our city, and those kids who have to go to school the next day and act like there's nothing happening. Those families who are enduring the bloodshed that is happening in our city. It's really alarming and concerning. There are people who want to see the sheriffs, and I'm hearing that the sheriff department is actually retrieving and leaving the city. So there are some truth to some of what I'm saying. There's some misconceptions. Can you just clarify what's going on within the police department?
Yeah, thank you, Councilman. And I think there's a two-pronged answer to your question. First, as a police department, when we're in this sort of semi-crises with this sort of violence, we have a duty and an obligation to take those violent individuals off the street. And if there's, and I think this is a public meeting, and if we have members of the public here, I think it's extremely important for the members of this community to know that the individuals that are committing the violence in our community represent a small percentage of the people in the city. These are just a small, although it has such a wide ranging impact on members of the community. In reality, these are a small group of individuals who are committing this violence. And so one piece of this is we need to do what we're doing. Continue finding out who these individuals are and bring those individuals to justice to, number one, take violent people off the street, but also as a deterrent to send a message that this is what happens when individuals engage in that sort of violence. And working with our partners at all levels of law enforcement. I just had a conversation not too long ago with the new U.S. attorney in this area, with Tony Bacon. And she and I have a commitment that when these sorts of things are happening in our community, if there's an opportunity to bring federal charges or any other federal resources to help us to address this, we have that commitment from her office. As well as we have very, very close relationships with the FBI and the DEA and some of the other federal agencies. So we're working very, very closely with these agencies, and we actually are taking these individuals off the street. It's not always publicized, but we're making a tremendous amount of progress with that. So that's one piece of it. We've got to get these individuals off the street. We got to send a message. And you talked about police presence. That's certainly a piece of it. You know, making sure that that we have patrol patterns that can, you know, help us to accomplish some of our goals. But the other piece, Councilman, is something that's going to take a little while, because what this involves, you talked about some of these kids who have to go to school now and they're traumatized, and you're absolutely right. There is so much trauma that we're seeing with our young people in our community now. And this trauma is manifesting itself in a lot of different ways with some of our young people. Some, they need some sort of intervention from some of our social agencies to help them through this. Some are reacting to this trauma in destructive, violent ways themselves. We're starting to see a disturbing pattern of 13 and 14 or 15-year-olds who are in stolen cars, who have weapons, who are engaging in other acts of violence. And what concerns me is that those 13, 14-year-olds that are engaged in that today are going to perhaps be our violent individuals 2 years from now, or 3 years from now, or even sooner. So the other prong of this, Councilman, is that we've got, as a community, we've got to figure out a way of really touching these young people that are impacted by this violence that we're seeing, so that we can shut it off at the one end by taking individuals off the street. But if we just got this pipeline of violent individuals that are replacing them, all we're doing is spinning our wheels. And 2 years from now, 3 years from now, we're going to be having the same conversation. And so we've got to work on that piece of it, because, you know, these young men, and it's primarily young men who are engaging in this violence, they didn't just wake up Saturday morning and say, I'm going to go shoot somebody if they make me upset. I mean, this is a culmination of some things that have happened in these young men's lives. And so how as a community, how can we touch these young men while they're younger men to try to prevent them from evolving to a place where they're engaging in this sort of violence and terrorizing our community? So it's a two-pronged approach. I think our officers are doing a great job of on the one end. I think we're doing a great job on the other end as well. We just got to work harder. Both the police and the community have to work harder.
My next question is more so with the sheriff deputies.
We're not
Oh.
we're not having an in-depth conversation. It was just a kind of updates, and you're muted, Mr. Nani. Because
I was just gonna ask my last question, if that's okay. It's more so the sheriffs. I'm curious, the deputies, if they're here in the city, what are some of the tasks that they're doing?
They're providing support for officers, especially on some of the scenes where the officers have to, where we need additional bodies to secure scenes. They're serving as a presence with officers. You know, I know I've gotten complaints about traffic stops where instead of where they would normally see 2 law enforcement officers, now they're seeing 4 or 5, and I have to explain that that's because our officers are doubled up with some of our sheriff's deputies. So they're providing that type of support, you know, intelligence and things of that sort. Right now, the numbers of deputies has been scaled down, and part of that is because we have officers now that will be coming on in another week or 2. We have 19 officers that'll be graduating from the police academy, and that'll be hitting the road. And so that will provide that support that we need in that instance. But they've been helpful throughout the summer, the deputies, I mean.
Okay, thank you for that question, Mr. Nani. Thank you for your time, Chief.
Welcome.
For bringing me. So with that, we'll move on. So thank you.
All right. Take you. Have a great evening, everybody.
Okay. Mr. Nani, if you were here on time, that question would have been in under the wire and not late. We still have to go through the agenda. Just real quick, I'll just jump right into it. We have the public hearing on the agenda for tonight. It's ordinance 2092-20. It's Mr. O'Brien's. We'll have the hearing, and we'll be moving that based on the hearing. Next is approval of minutes from a previous meeting. And we've got January 4th, 2021 meeting minutes I'm offering to move forward with for approval. Next, and wave your hand. I'm looking up and down if I missed something. Under consideration of local laws, it wasn't something that was on there, but I believe Mr. Conti is going to amend local law J.
Yeah, so local law J, which is the CPRB local law, that was also sent out today with the updated public safety agenda. At the last public safety meeting, we had a lot of discussion. So the local law was amended, revised to reflect that discussion and some other amendments that needed to be made. This will be on the February 8th Public Safety Committee agenda in anticipation that, or the possibility that there will be no further amendments after that February 8th meeting. If we amend it tonight, we'll have the further discussion on February 8th. If there are no changes to the amended version, it will be live and we'd be able to take it up at our next meeting in February on February 18. So that it just kind of speeds up the process. When we talked about it at the committee meeting, we were looking at amending it after the next public safety meeting and then having it age and bringing it up for a vote on March 1. So by amending it tonight, we potentially speed up the process. It doesn't preclude revisions that might come out of the Public Safety Committee meeting on February 8th. If that does happen and there are further changes, just pushed it off to March 1. So that's why I'd like to make a move to amend it tonight so that it can age. And it's on the agenda for February 8th. And there can be further changes, but it's just potential. Okay.
Gets it ready. Yes, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Conti. Okay, next, moving on. Of course, in under ordinances held, Mr. O'Brien's 2092-20, which is the subject of the public hearing. That's number 10 on the agenda. It's ordinance 2092-20. Then moving on to resolutions introduced, Mr. Hoey's 1221-21R, thanking, actually on mine, it's thanking
Yes,
our state representatives for that. Okay.
because they work behind the scenes.
So that'll be,
Can I do an MC on that tonight, or so you just do a voice vote, or?
no, it's fine. Yeah, it's regular, just intro and ask for it to be passed.
Okay, thank you.
Intro and ask. That's it. That's it. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Hoey. Next is by Ms. Farrell's resolution 1321-21R. It's for elimination of full-time position and creation of another in human resources. That'll be going to finance committee. That's 1321-21R. Next by Mr. O'Brien is 1421-21R. It's a resolution regarding the status of Anthony Street as a portion of Westland Hills Park. That'll be going to planning for further discussion. Okay.
I thought at the
You're
last time,
muted,
you said
Mr. O'Brien.
there is a certain amount of urgency to this because there's the strong
Oh,
possibility.
you know what? You know what? Did I? Can you hear me?
Yeah,
I can't.
You
Okay, I
did.
can't. I lost everything here.
yeah, because
We-
this
I
is
did- we did.
making the
So-
decision. This is us referring it to the state controller to look at the facts and determine whether they believe, and he had jurisdiction over park alienation. But there's a certain amount of urgency because there's a very strong possibility of a lawsuit between the neighborhood association and the planning board. Now, I know Hyde and Marissa have started talking, but there's nothing to assure that the city yet acknowledges, the Corp Council yet
Oh, you know what?
acknowledges that it's a park, even though there was an ordinance passed in 1974, which to me clearly states that it is, because it appropriated a large sum of money to do parkland improvements, and Anthony Street was one of them.
Yep. So thank you for that, Mr. O'Brien. That's correct. You explained that actually during our last caucus, and I hadn't marked it on mine for the passage. Okay. So we'll be moving that. Next, by Mr. Anani's resolution 152121R for raising the flag. We're all co-sponsors on that. It's the same, similar to our last year's resolution. Okay. Okay. Next, it's the MC by Ms. Farrell for the water board. I know in caucus, when we talked about this, I mentioned and said I would refer to finance for further discussion, but Mr. Simcoe was at the meeting. He's here now. And I really see no reason actually to send it to finance. He's here again if members have questions, but I'm going to defer to the council members. I'm comfortable moving ahead with it. Everyone else, I mean.
And I believe, Kelly, historically, it does not usually go through finance. It's something that's just discussed in caucus and then voted on.
Okay, thank you. So we will be voting on that. And so, okay, yeah, that's okay. Now on to resolutions held. We have number 5 on the agenda. It's Ms. Fahey's resolution 62120R for the snow removal from city sidewalks and street crossings. We'll be voting on that. That actually went through General Services Committee.
Yeah, and it passed unanimously.
Yeah. Okay. The next is resolution 51121. It's number 10 on the agenda. It's reappointment of Chris Ellis to the planning board. That passed planning committee with a positive recommendation. And then finally, number 11, resolution 61121R. It's the reappointment of Martin Hall to the by Ms. Fahey of Martin Hall to the planning board. Right. Okay. So that's the agenda. I want to roll back to the meeting minutes. I misspoke. It's the January 21st meeting minutes, not the January 4th meeting minutes that I will be offering for approval. And if no one has anything else, I'll turn it over to Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Kimbrough.
All right.
Not too bad, not too bad. We would like to start tonight's Common Council meeting, February 1st, 2021, Albany Common Council meeting. Can the clerk please call the roll?
Yes, Mr. President, if all members can unmute themselves so that they're able to respond to their name. Anani.
Present.
Ballerin.
Here.
Conti.
Here.
Doesschate.
Here.
Fahey.
Here.
Farrell.
Here.
Flynn.
Here.
Frederick.
Here.
Hoey.
Here.
Igo.
Here.
Johnson.
Here.
Kimbrough.
Here.
Love.
Here.
O'Brien.
Here.
Robinson.
Here.
All members are present.
Thank you. Now we're going to move to our Pledge of Allegiance and our moment of silence. And the mayor had mentioned some people we've lost over this year, 2020. So I'd like to mention and people keep his family in prayer and in mind. Warren Mackey, a pillar of our community, passed away today. So in your thoughts, we'd like to remember him and his family on today. Warren was a role model, mentor to so many people in our community and our young people. So we'd like to remember that. So Madam Clerk, can you please put up the flag for Pledge of Allegiance and then a moment of silence. Please join me. I pledge allegiance to the flag, United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Now moving on to our public hearing. In public hearing, we individuals will be speaking upon the ordinance that I'll have the clerk read in a few minutes. In this public hearing, and public hearing is different than public comment. During public hearing, common council members can ask the speaker questions about the subject matter. And in the public hearing, you can only talk about the ordinance that's in front of us. So, Madam Clerk, can you please read the ordinance and let us know if we have anyone signed up for the public hearing? Thank you.
Yes, Mr. President. The ordinance reads as follows: an ordinance amending Chapter 375 of the Code of the City of Albany, changing the zoning classification of 1057 Washington Avenue and 1061 Washington Avenue from mixed-use neighborhood center, which is MUNC, to residential two-family R-2, and amending the zoning map accordingly.
Do we have anyone signed up?
We have several people that are signed up for public comment. The first one I see is, I'm sorry, for the
Okay.
public hearing. The first one that I see is, I believe, Paul Lamar.
Paul Lamar? Are you there, sir? Oh, yeah, I see him. Go ahead, Mr. Oh, he's muted again. Okay, there he is.
Hi
Go ahead,
there.
Mr. Palmer. Can you just state your name and address for the record, please?
Yes, my name is Paul Lamar. I live with my husband, Mark Emer, at 143 Rosemont Street.
Go right ahead, sir.
Thank you. I would like to make a few points in support of the proposed legislation. The two houses in question are very much like other residences along Washington Avenue, all of which are zoned R1 or R2. This designation allows for commercial space within the buildings, and indeed there are some businesses and houses like these along Washington Avenue. In other words, the owners of 1057 and 1061 may continue to use these houses as apartment rentals or small business rentals. The value to their property is not affected by a change in the zoning. A key concept in this discussion is neighborhood. This is our neighborhood, not the neighborhood of the owners of these two properties. Those owners live elsewhere, so it is appropriate that we should speak about the current life of this neighborhood. It's also important to remember that these two properties were misdesignated MUNC when the MUNC was created. The boundary line that ran along the rear of businesses on Colvin Avenue should not have been extended to Washington Avenue. Councilmember Mike O'Brien has spoken to that point, accepting responsibility on behalf of the Common Council for the inattention to the map's boundary lines that incorrectly included these two houses in the MUNC zone. Nor was the required review period was there a required review period to correct the mistake? All we ask is that the Common Council correct the error now. Finally, at one of the recent Common Council meetings, a concern was raised that when neighbors get together to question or resist certain development proposals, the growth of Albany might be impeded. In other words, should Albany just stop developing because some residents have reservations about a particular project? But such a thing could never happen because every project is looked at individually by city agencies. There is no movement to stop growth, but residents have the right and responsibility to speak out about specific proposals to make sure they're appropriate for their neighborhood in Albany. So I would sincerely hope that this ordinance would pass on its merits. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Any questions? Seeing none? Thank you, Mr. Lamar.
Thank you.
Thank you. Can the clerk please call the next speaker?
All right, so we have some speakers that are in the queue as attendees, and we're just trying to confirm. Yes, we've
Gotcha.
checked
Okay.
in with, I see Hyde Clark here, but I'm almost positive he's speaking regarding the
I would like to
resolution.
speak for public hearing in the chat. Mr. Clark? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good evening, Mr. Clark. Are you here to speak upon the ordinance 2092-20?
I am, yes.
Okay, go right ahead, sir.
Thank you. Members of the Common Council, I just wanted to speak in support of Councilman O'Brien's ordinance to rezone these two properties. I think it's important to consider the legislative intent that went into zoning these two residential structures as MUNC. That being that there was no legislative intent. Zoning must be consistent with the comprehensive plan. And one of the main purposes of the USDO is to protect and preserve the city's residential neighborhoods. The current use is two-family residential for both structures. Pursuant to the USDO, two-family residential is actually not permitted in the current zoning district. So this amendment does not take any development right away from the property owners. It actually makes it so the current use is actually allowed. For now, it is a non-conforming use that cannot be expanded. So as a non-conforming use, I'd like to remind the property owners and the council that the following restrictions are actually in place for these properties. The building or parcel may not be enlarged to accommodate any expansion of the non-conforming use. No non-conforming use may be reestablished after it's been discontinued or vacated. No non-conforming use may be converted into a different non-conforming use. And in the event that either one of these structures was damaged or destroyed to more than 50% of the cost of replacement, the structure, when rebuilt, would actually have to conform to regulations, and the current use would not be allowed. So to me, the council is not taking away rights from the property owner. It's actually making it so the current use is allowed in this zoning district. And, you know, the current property owner did state in the committee meeting that there's a lot of businesses along the Washington Ave corridor. And I would actually like to point out that those are all zoned residential. These two properties are the odd properties out from the entire neighborhood. You know, there's nothing special about these two lots that make these buildings somehow more appropriate for a mixed-use commercial neighborhood than any other residential property that currently has an office use. The zoning map simply drew a straight line down the rear property boundaries. And just because there's commercial parking lots that run behind Colvin Avenue does not mean that these two residential properties are more consistent with a commercial use than the intended residential use. This is not about NIMBY. There's no current proposals for this property. It did involve a proposed Stewart's that was denied twice. And in those during the application for the proposed Stewart's, what continually came up was that that proposed commercial use was inconsistent with the neighborhood. So I worked with Councilman O'Brien on this and the neighbors in the sense that our neighbors shouldn't be forced to, you know, fight back against a proposed project just because two residential structures are zoned commercial when they should not be. So I asked the council to consider supporting Councilman O'Brien's resolution. And I think that by changing the zoning designations, we can have a more orderly development in our neighborhood, which is the purpose of zoning in the first place. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Clark. Any questions for Mr. Clark? Since this is public comment. Public hearing, sorry. No questions. Okay. Is there another speaker for the public hearing? Madam Clerk.
So we haven't got confirmation from the people that are in the queue. I do see Gene Solon, so we can bring him in and ask if he's speaking specific.
Mr. Solon, this is Common Council President Corey Ellis. are you here for the public hearing part of the agenda, or are you going to be doing a public speaking? Still muted. Mr. Solon?
I can move on to the written comment that was received while we wait for Mr. Solon to respond, if that's okay with you, Mr. President. This written correspondence comes from Patricia Doyle and reads as follows. I'm writing to support Common Councilman Mike O'Brien's Ordinance 2092-20 to rezone 1057 and 1061 Washington Avenue from mixed-use commercial to R2. The zoning of the two properties came into question when stewards proposed to demolish the two residential buildings, in addition to the existing key bank, and to construct a convenience store and gasoline fueling station abutting the residential properties on Rosemont. The main opposition to the proposed stewards was the commercial expansion project was inconsistent with the harmony of the neighborhood. Zoning districts are meant to protect neighborhoods and ensure orderly development. So long as these properties remain mixed-use commercial, future developers will look to bundle the two residential properties with the existing key bank and create a commercial lot, which is inconsistent with the Colvin Ave corridor and the nearby residences. The proposed rezone does not impact the current use of the properties and merely ensures the zoning district classification is consistent with the use. And that again was from Patricia Doyle.
Thank you. Mr. Sloan, I'm trying to see if
he's still muted.
No.
I have another written comment from Renee Marois of Eileen Street, which reads as follows. This area should be designated residential. The Sunoco gas station and former key bank at Washington and Colvin should be grandfathered in with no other commercial designation in that area. I have another public comment provided by Betty Ann Benware.
Well, we can say that for the public comment part.
I'm sorry, this is regarding ordinance 2092-20, so it's specific to the public hearing.
Go ahead.
I'm writing in support of Common Councilman Mike O'Brien's ordinance 2092-20 to rezone 1057 and 1061 Washington Avenue from mixed-use commercial to R2. The zoning of the two properties came into question when stewards proposed to demolish the two residential buildings in addition to the existing key bank and to construct a convenience store and gasoline fueling station abutting the residential properties on Rosemont. The main opposition to the proposed stewards was that the commercial expansion project was inconsistent with the harmony of the neighborhood. Zoning districts are meant to protect neighborhoods and ensure and provide for orderly development. So long as these properties remain mixed-use commercial, future developers will look to bundle the two residential properties with the existing key bank and create a commercial lot, which is inconsistent with the Colvin Avenue corridor and negatively affect the nearby contiguous residents as well as the surrounding neighborhood. The proposed rezone does not impact the current use of the property and merely ensures that the zoning district classification is consistent with the use. Thank you for your consideration. And that's from Betty Ann Benware.
Thank you.
Mr. Solon is still muted. This comment.
Is there any more that we have?
There's quite a few. This comment is from.
Well, we can say those for public comment. Public hearings for us to hear from them and then possibly ask questions if we have any.
Okay.
So we can just say those for public comment period.
Okay.
So if Mr. Solon, I hope he can hear us. I want to know if he wants to. Okay.
So you
Council
would like
President Ellis?
Yep.
If the comments are related to the public hearing rather than public comment period.
Have they been designated that? I don't know.
Yes, they all
okay,
are specific to 2092.
I thought they were just public comments.
Mm-mm.
You know, because you can comment and public comment on the ordinance as well. So it's just usually a public hearing, you want to be able to ask questions, but if they're directed towards that, that's fine. It doesn't. 6 in one hand, half a dozen in the other to me.
The only reason I bring it up is just, you know, if if for whatever reason, there's an Article
There's no
78 on
difference.
this or something.
They're not here to answer questions. The only difference between public comment and public hearing is if council members have questions of them. So if they
Well,
read them
just-
now or read them in public comment, it's no different. But go ahead.
So this one is from Vince Raguso and reads as follows. Members, this is a no-brainer. Let's pass this ordinance 2092-20 to rezone 1057 Washington Ave and 1061 Washington Ave into residential two-family R2 parcels and to change zoning map accordingly. As you know, when the planning department was doing the USDO, there were a few mistakes and this is one of them. How many times has the planning department been asked to explain different flubs in the USDO? Well, this is another one. Let's do the right thing and pass this ordinance. Thank you. This next comment is regarding 2092-20 also, and it's from Honor Conklin. Reads as follows. I'm writing in full support of Mike O'Brien's ordinance 2092 to rezone 1057 and 1061 Washington Avenue from mixed use commercial to R2. The issue came to my attention when Stewart's proposed to build a convenience store and gas station on the site of Key Bank and the two residential properties in competition with a long-established station across the street. I looked through the USDO and the previous zoning regulations and saw that Christopher Spencer approved grandfathering in the previous zone without removing the two residential properties to where they should be, R2. The purpose of the USDO was to rectify past errors and to support traditional neighborhoods. It has become more and more clear that what is in writing has not been the goal of the commissioner of the planning department nor his administration. The above ordinance would correct the errors of the present zoning of the two residential buildings and properly set a precedence for future discoveries in the flawed USDO. This comment is specific to 2092-20 and submitted by Sarah Harrington, Albert Wilson IV, Deborah Conti, and Christopher Conti, and reads as follows. We represent a number of residents of Rosemont Street whose properties are closely situated to the properties that are the subject of the above referenced ordinance. We write to reiterate our support for Councilmember Michael O'Brien's application to amend the zoning map to change the classification of 1057 and 1061 Washington Avenue from MUNC to R2. We detailed reasons for our support in our letter dated January 11, 2021. We would just like to emphasize a couple of points in response to some of the comments of the property owners and the council members expressed at the January 11, 2021 meeting of the Planning, Economic Development and Land Use Committee. Specifically, there appeared to be some concern that the proposed change was reactionary or intended to defeat a particular development proposal. The Stewart's project was denied by the planning board, but this application is not about Stewart's. The proposed zoning amendment is to achieve more appropriate zoning at this location so that scaled commercial uses may be pursued along the commercial corridor on Colvin Avenue, and the current residential use may be maintained on Washington Avenue, the residential corridor. The USDO sets forth several standards for the council to consider in determining whether to amend the zoning map. Among others, these considerations include whether proposed amendment would be consistent with the comprehensive plan, improving compatibility among uses and ensure efficient development within the city and result in a logical and orderly development pattern. The proposed zoning map amendment accomplishes these goals. The current use of the properties is incompatible with its zoning designation, and the amendment would make the zoning for these properties consistent, not only with their current use, but also with the surrounding properties that face Washington Avenue, all of which are zoned as R1 or R2 properties, improving compatibility and logical and orderly development. Based on the foregoing and for the reasons set forth in our January letter, we ask that the council zone to approve of the proposed change to the zoning map. Again, that was from Sarah Harrington, Albert Wilson IV, Deborah Conti, Christopher Conti. Carol Carmen of Rosemont writes the following. We are writing in support of ordinance 2092 to rezone the properties located at 1057 and 1061 Washington Ave from MUNC to R2. Residential zoning is intended to preserve land for housing, which supports the current use of these two lots. The surrounding neighborhood predominantly consists of residential dwellings, which were built mid-century 1900s and have been used as such since that time. The current zoning of MU and C for these two properties is inconsistent with the Upper Washington neighborhood. The Colvin Avenue corridor has always been home to a variety of office-based businesses or small retail establishments. The recent steward's proposal to raise these two dwellings to combine the lots with the Key Bank on the corner was rightly rejected as a project not congruent with the surrounding neighborhood. My husband and I grew up in this neighborhood and have lived here for over 50 years. The past several years has seen a resurgence of families with young school-aged children moving in and bringing a vibrancy with them. In order to dissuade future developers from presenting similar proposals and to maintain the trajectory of young families moving to the neighborhood and remaining in the city, we recommend and think it is incumbent upon the Common Council to approve the ordinance, updating them to residential R2. We would like to thank you in advance for your consideration of this matter. And that is from Carol Carmen and Timothy Carmen. This is from John Walsh. He asked for the opportunity to speak live, but I do not see John Walsh as one of the attendees waiting. Gary Demalowicz has a comment regarding 2092-20 as well. Good evening, my name is Gary Demalowicz, and along with my wife, we are the owners of 1057 Washington Ave. Our family at one time had owned 3 buildings on Washington Ave and lived in the neighborhood over 60 years. So we know the neighborhood better than most. I would like to correct the inaccuracies in the petition before us. Line 3, that the property was incorrectly zoned. This is not true. The zoning is correct. 1057 Washington Ave has been zoned mixed use for many years. In fact, we had a doctor office, dentist office, a food brokerage office. The property has been mixed use for years and it blended into the neighborhood beautifully. It was mixed use long before many of the current residents lived there. All the property around my building are commercial. Our buildings, sad to say, are the last ones left. There was a time in our city when we promoted mixed use 2-family buildings, and there were many on Washington Ave. Line 4 said there are no other residential buildings in our neighborhood that are zoned mixed use. Again, this is not true. In fact, there are many buildings on Washington Ave that are zoned for business. Line 5 talks about consistent adjacent residential use on both Washington Ave and Rosemont Street. Comparing Rosemont Street to Washington Ave is like apples to oranges. There is no comparison. Rosemont Street is a dead end, single family homes with no through traffic. One thing Rosemont Street does have in common is their backyard all but up against the commercial property on the east side. It was commercial before they bought their homes and it was commercial when they bought their homes. Washington Ave is a 4-lane road that is emergency route for police, fire, ambulance. It has truck and bus traffic and has 25,000 cars a day past the front of our building. Washington Ave has a gas station, dentist office, doctor's offices, daycare, attorney office, multi-unit apartments. Why the petition compares Rosemont Street to Washington Ave makes no sense. Our property is 100 feet from Colvin Ave. Colvin Ave is what we should be compared to. On 6, the petition said the zoning change would be consistent with existing residential structure adjacent to existing gas station on the corner of Colvin Ave. This is not accurate. 1057 Washington Ave has been zoned mixed use for many years. The house next to the gas station is a single family house that was boarded up and vacant for many years and is in much needed repairs and had many violations with the planning department. I asked you to walk by the house next to the gas station tomorrow and see the debris and trash piled up. I see work going on and no sign of any permits. In fact, we take pride in our building, and to be compared to that property is an insult to us. Mixed use is the right zoning for our property. It was a zone mixed use a long time before many of the current residents lived there. With respect to signatures on the petition, one would think my house was on Rosemont Street. How signatures from people that live afar over as Rosemont and Lincoln Ave to State Street, Euclid Ave, Beach Ave, Melrose, not even close to our property. I did submit over 50 letters of support that support our position, and they were from people that live across the street on Washington and close to Colvin Ave. In my 30 years in the legislature representing the 14th Ward and part of the 8th Ward, I never saw a zoning change from mixed use to R2. Please note the planning board could not get a second to approve this change, they supported my position, and I asked the committee to do the same and vote no on this ordinance. This is bad public policy. If the city is going to change zoning before a project is even announced, what message does that send to anyone who wants to invest in our city? For all the inaccuracies I pointed out, I ask you to vote no on this ordinance. Thank you for your time. And again, that was from Gary Demolowicz. I have a comment from Renee Marois. This area should be designated as residential. The Sunoco gas station and former Key Bank at Washington and Colvin should be grandfathered in with no other commercial designations in that area. Karen Kniff. I'm writing in support of Councilman Michael O'Brien's ordinance 2092 to rezone 1057 and 1061 Washington Avenue to R2. These properties are part of a residential community and should be classified as such. This area within the Upper Washington Avenue Neighborhood Association is a community of families and friends. Currently, there is an abundance of commercial business of all kinds within a few blocks of everyone. Continued commercial and high density construction will have a negative impact on its livability and will create decline of stable Albany neighborhood. The R2 designation will help reduce decline. Again, I support Councilman O'Brien's ordinance 2092. And I believe that concludes the ones that I had, unless I missed anything.
And I'll just ask Mr. Sloan again. Solon. Okay, since no response, I guess. And Mr. Williams, my apologies. Advice on council, I did tell me why they needed to be read in the record during the public hearing. So my apologies to you, and thank you for our corporate counsel.
No apology necessary.
Our counsel JR for giving me that. Thank you, sir. With that being said, we will designate this public hearing closed at this time. We'll move on to other matters in our agenda. Now we'll go on to our public comment period. During public comment period, each person has 30 minutes to speak upon what they would like to. During that, each speaker will say their name and their address for the record. Unlike a public hearing, common council members cannot address or answer any questions at this time. If they choose to respond or do so, they will do so at a later date during the agenda. So with that being said, Speaker, do we have anyone signed up this evening? I mean, Clerk, do we have anyone signed up to speak on public comment this evening?
So I'm assuming Gene Solon stayed muted because he wanted to speak during public comment, but he's still muted. I know Leah Golby has been waiting patiently. If we can let her in.
Yes, go right ahead. Council member, Miss Leah Golby. Former City Council member, Miss Golby, there she is. Go right ahead.
Thank you.
Good evening.
Good evening. So I wanted to talk quickly on two topics. First of all, I strongly support the reappointment of Mr. Ellis and Mr. Hull to the planning board. I've watched them numerous meetings. They both give thoughtful assessment to the issues before them, and they will continue to be strong members of the board. And also I wanted to comment on Councilmember Fahey's resolution, her resolution to promote equity and pedestrian safety and mobility by improving snow and ice removal from city sidewalks, street crossings, and bus stops. Trying to find I wrote something, but of course I can't find it. So anyway, I will just say that I strongly support this resolution. It points to the need to work together to find solutions. I attended the General Services Committee last week. And DGS has some very good plans in place to deal with ADA accessibility, removal of snow and ice from ADA ramps, which is really, really important. The city needs to be in compliance with the Americans with Disabilities Act. I have been stunned. I mean, I was baffled when I first came to Albany in 1986. I could not believe the state of the sidewalks when it snowed here. I would just always imagine, what if I were using a wheelchair? What if I were a parent with a stroller? How could I possibly navigate these sidewalks? So I know many of us have worked together over the years to try to make things better, and there have been marked improvements, but we're still not there. And so I commend Ms. Fahey for her resolution, and I urge everyone to work together going forward, because this is not just a resolution to pass and put on the shelf, but this is a resolution that calls for action among everyone, including, working with CDTA and community members, to make sure that everyone's life is safe and everyone can get where they need to go safely. So thank you.
Mr. President, if you could just repeat your last couple statements. And you're muted.
I muted myself. I don't know how that happened. I just asking, do we have any written comments or anybody waiting to public comment?
No one is waiting in queue, but we do have a couple written comments. One from Marlon Anderson of Albany, New York. Community violence over a year ago, I presented the council with the city with an idea that would change the dynamic on city streets regarding gun violence, something that was clearly and is clearly needed, but to your detriment, it was ignored. And now look at the dynamic on our streets. Gun violence has become the accepted norm. People are looking for the chance to shoot and kill in this city. We must change the dynamic and mentality, and it won't change with politics, political committees, task forces, or appointees. It will take action. A targeted anti-loitering ordinance geared to preventing gun violence will save lives, and clearly lives need to be saved. It is now up to you as elected leaders to take the action that is needed to save them. Again, that was from Marlon Anderson. And this one is from Karen Strong. I'm writing in favor of the reappointment of Martin Hull to Albany's Planning Board. As a professional planner, Mr. Hull is highly qualified member of the Planning Board, and his experience shows. I am concerned that some common council members' disagreement with the USDO have translated to a nonpartisan board member. As you all know, a planning board member's responsibilities is determined by New York state law, and they are tasked with implementing the zoning laws that are approved by the Common Council. As such, planning board members have limited discretion in their decision-making. In describing the role of findings in local government decisions, the New York State Department of State Office of General Counsel says, open quote, local boards such as planning boards, zoning boards of appeals, historic preservation boards, and environmental quality review boards are subject to standard rules of administrative law and do not have unfettered decision-making authority. They may make a decision only when all of the requirements specified in state statute or local law are addressed, end quote. I have lived in Albany all of my adult life, and I served on the Albany 2030 Comprehensive Plan Committee. It is exciting that 12 years later, the plan continues to be implemented through the USDO. I have never seen so much private development in the city, which is essential for a vital Albany of the future. What we need on the planning board is a person who is willing to learn the complexities, understands the role, who can fairly apply the law, and is willing to devote the time needed to fulfill this volunteer position to the best of their ability. We are lucky to have Mr. Hull on the planning board, and I urge you to vote in favor of his reappointment. Lawrence Clark, I submitted the following. I have another concern about South Pearl Street, downtown Albany, between McCarthy and Mount Hope on South Pearl Street. There is an underpass that has absolutely no lighting at nighttime. This issue really needs to be addressed. It is dangerous for people walking underneath an underpass in the dark, especially with a on-ramp to jump on the highway. The way society is today, safety should be a priority, and I'm hoping someone can look into the above matter. It is the other path on South Pearl between Mount Hope and McCarthy. Absolutely no lighting there. Should be some type of lighting underneath there. There are children to walk underneath, the unemployed women to walk underneath the underpass, and even anyone should be able to have a well-lit, safe path. And I hope a copy of this email was sent to the mayor's office, because I've noticed on the south end with residents down here ask for something, majority of the time it is ignored. Relax for a traffic light years ago, and they were talking about budget restraints, but there was plenty of money to put a bicycle lane. And I hope this issue in my email is sent to the mayor's office. You have children walking. And that's all I have for comment.
Okay, seeing we have no one else in the queue for public comment and no other written public comment statements, public comment period at this time is closed tonight.
Mr. Ellis, I'm sorry, we have one more person.
Oh, they are? Okay.
Yeah. It's Mr. Hyde Clark. I'm gonna promote him now.
Mr. Clark?
Yes, thank you.
Right ahead, sir.
This is just a comment on Councilman O'Brien's proposed resolution regarding Westland Hills Park, and I just wanted to make a few comments about the submissions that I've made this week. I hope the council members had a chance to review my memorandum regarding the implied dedication of what is Anthony Street to Westland Hills Park, and also my response to Mr. Spencer. And I just wanted to reiterate my support for the resolution, and I also hope that the council may consider an express dedication of Anthony Street to Westland Hills Park, so that even though I'm very confident that I've shown why that land is impliedly dedicated, both from the long historic use as the park entrance, resolution from 1974, which demonstrates that money was actually spent to improve and actually construct that entrance to Westland Hills Park, and the fact that there's no city street sign, the fact that there's a giant Westland Hills monument at the corner, there's a sign for the park on the opposite corner. I mean, all indications are is that this has been Westland Hills Park. That's when you enter Westland Hills Park. It's where patrons that Westland Hills Little League Park, when there's overflow parking and not enough parking in the parking lot. And I just think that the resolution is an important step to send a message that the council agrees that there's an issue here regarding the implied dedication. And I think it would be beneficial if the council also considered an express dedication to take away any possible future development or use of that park property in the future. So thank you for your consideration. And if anyone has any questions regarding my memo or my response to Mr. Spencer, I'm available by phone or email and happy to discuss that with you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. With that final statement, public comment period is closed. We'll move on to the approval of minutes for January 21st. Mr. Kimbrough?
Thank you, Mr. President. I offer our meeting minutes from our January 21st of 2021 meeting for approval.
Second.
There's a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Ayes raised. Those opposed? Approval of minutes approved. And moving on to local laws. Mr. Conti.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to notice off the amendments to local law J of 2020. which were previously transmitted to members and requested to be held.
Thank you, Mr. Conti. Mr. Kimbrough?
Thank you. Rest of local laws on the agenda are held, Mr. President.
Thank you so much. Moving on to any committee reports. Ms. Fahey.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Planning, Land Use and Economic Development Committee met on January 26th on Resolution 5/1221R to reappoint Christopher Ellis to the Planning Board, and that was voted out of committee with a positive recommendation. We also met that same night on Resolution 6/1221R, a resolution to reappoint Martin Hull to the Planning Board, and that resolution was voted out of committee with a positive recommendation. We also met on Ordinance 46-12220, that's regarding technical amendments to the USDO. Then Planning Committee will meet again on February 3rd to discuss Local Law G, and that's the City of Albany Commission on Municipal Internet Service. And we'll also be discussing again Ordinance 46-12220, technical amendments to the USDO. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. O'Brien. Uh-oh, you got malfunction. Go ahead.
Can you hear me?
No, we can't. Sound like you're underwater. This,
Can you hear me now?
nope.
Okay. I can go.
So we might have to pause you and might try to go out and come back in, Mike, and see if that changes the tone. We will wait patiently for Mr. O'Brien because it's a very important report. Go ahead, Mike, let's see.
Okay, can you hear me? I went out of the meeting and came back in.
There you go.
Okay, so the General Services Committee met on January 25th to consider Resolution 6/2120R. That's Kathy Fahey's resolution regarding equity and pedestrian safety and mobility, regarding snow and ice removal on sidewalks, street crossings, and bus stops. We voted unanimously to pass it, but we also decided that it would be a good idea to reconvene at a date a few weeks hence, because the commissioner brought up the fact that they may have to bid out for some equipment and maybe even bid out for some contracts. So he's going to come back to us. So we definitely recommended that it be passed tonight, but it's not a subject we're going to forget with passing it, as Leah pointed out in her public comments. It will continue to be, its implementation will continue to be a discussion.
Thank you, Mr. O'Brien. I don't think there's any more committee reports. Oh, Mr. Kimbrough.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. President. The Public Safety Committee met on the 25th of January to discuss and tweak Local Law J, which is the CPRB legislation, and it led to those amendments that Mr. Conti put forth. So hopefully we're getting closer to finalizing that. And we also have an upcoming meeting on the 8th of February to finalize or discuss that one more time, and also review the police reform collaborative report. So the final report just came out. I'd urge members to review that so they can be prepared to ask questions or comment during that meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kimbrough. Seeing no other reports, we'll now move on down the agenda to ordinances. We will go to ordinances held. Mr. O'Brien.
Mr. O'Brien, you're muted.
I notice ordinance 209220, and I ask for its passage on a roll call vote.
Can the clerk please can the clerk please read the ordinance?
An ordinance amending chapter 375 of the Code of the City of Albany, the Unified Sustainable Development Ordinance, changing the zoning classification of 1057 Washington Ave and 1061 Washington Avenue from mixed-use neighborhood center, MUNC, to residential two-family, R2, and amending the zoning map accordingly.
Hold on, Mr. Igo, are you okay?
Muted.
'Cause Mr. Igo's been waving, I don't know. You're muted, Joe.
President, I just wanted to let everybody know that I will be recusing myself on.
He's frozen. Sounded like he said he'd be recusing himself on this vote. Okay, because on my end, he's frozen. I don't know if he's frozen on anybody else.
He's frozen on my end too. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
But that's what he said.
Clerk just read the ordinance. Is there any discussion on the ordinance? Mr. O'Brien?
Yeah, we've all heard the comments of the neighbors and of Hyde Clark, who has a lot of legal expertise as a land use attorney. You know, one of the things which amazes me when I was listening to Gary Demalowitz talk about this particular property was he said it's been mixed-use neighborhood center for years, which is not true. It only became mixed-use neighborhood center in late 2017 when we passed the USDO. Prior to that, it had been several things, but for several years, Calvin Avenue, that block of Calvin Avenue had been commercial office, which would have allowed him to do what he did. You know, he had it as a residence and he said he had it as a real estate office. And those uses were all allowed. Apparently, what Gary doesn't realize is that in 2017, when it mistakenly got included on the map as the rest of Calvin Avenue, that block, as mixed-use neighborhood center, the use that he's had of that property for years became illegal. And in fact, as Hyde pointed out, if you wanted to put a big extension or something on that house to accommodate whatever, you wouldn't be allowed to do it. And if he, as a two-family residence, and if it burnt and he had to redo the structure, he wouldn't be allowed to do that either. And in fact, none of us really paid much attention to the impact of mixed-use neighborhood center on these two properties of Washington Avenue because we didn't really realize that the zoning map had converted them to a new status, which technically excluded them. So it didn't become a problem until Stewart's wanted to come in and build something which is zoned in a mixed-use neighborhood center, but would definitely have a tremendous impact on Rosemont Street. And it's not apples and oranges. Rosemont Street is a residential property. It directly abuts these properties, and that whole many blocks of Washington is basically two-family residential or single-family residential, from Manning all the way up to the Harriman campus. So I appreciate that Gary has lived in Albany his whole life and probably has a connection to our part of the city, but I'm astounded that he thought that this was mixed-use neighborhood center for years, and astounded that he doesn't realize that mixed-use neighborhood center makes anything he has to do to restore its use as two-family residential illegal. So I think we're dealing with a lot of misapprehensions here, and I think the common sense thing is what the planning board articulated in its Stewart's decision very well, was that the whole character of the neighborhood, with the exception of the bank at Calvin and Washington and the other gas station at Calvin and Washington, is basically residential with a few small businesses, a midwifery, family daycare, and dentist office mixed in. So that's nothing like what mixed-use neighborhood center is. So I really think that the residents made a very legitimate concern to basically maintain this for what it always was. And it was one of those errors, one of those flubs in the USDO that we unintentionally, we didn't, look closely at the line that they drew when they were redrawing all of Colvin Avenue into a new zoning category. So I think it really is a correction. I don't think it hurts the two owners at all. The only thing that it does, it protects against a very large, high volume traffic stewards or some similar type of enterprise sitting right next to Rosemont Street. And by the way, virtually all of those people live within a very close circle around this area. They weren't pulled in from other sides of the city with maybe only one person. I think there might have been one from Chestnut Street. But by and large, most of them were very close and directly impacted by this. So I would ask for your support on this. And the other point is, since Gary is an owner of the property, and I definitely respect that, and I respect him, known him for many years. But as an owner of the property, 50% of that, his objection to it necessitates a 3/4 vote. In other words, 12 members of the council tonight have to vote for this, or it remains mixed-use neighborhood center, which hopefully nothing will happen to Gary's house and he has to rebuild it and be prohibited from doing so. But it basically is a protection for him as well as for the neighborhood. So, thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Ms. Fahey.
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to echo a lot of what Mike said. I want to point out, and this is very important, I felt like the planning committee took this this ordinance and this zone change extremely seriously. We looked at both sides of the issue. And these are property owners and they have big plans for these two properties. But the other side made a very strong case as well. There was confusion too, because of the applications to demolish the house, the earlier applications to demolish the houses and build the Stewart shop and gas station there. But it's important to just re-emphasize that those applications were denied, and actually twice. And because they felt that the project was out of scale with the surrounding uses and out of character with the neighborhood there on Washington Avenue. If you were to look there on Washington Avenue, just like Mike said, they're mostly 1- and 2-family residences. Yes, there are some offices. You'll see some doctor offices, in some of the residences, but it's nothing in comparison to what you might see over on Colvin Avenue, and what a Stewart shop would have brought to the area. So I think in the end, the planning committee decided that the zone change was warranted, and that indeed, back in 2017, an error was made. These two properties should have been zoned R2, residential, two-family homes. So I just urge all council members to support this ordinance. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hoey.
Yes, one of the few things that I've learned, well, I've learned a lot, coming on the council, is that we respect, each ward knows, their representative knows what's good for their ward. And, I've talked to Mike, I've listened to Mike, I've listened to the neighbors, I've listened to the owners. And, I feel I am going to be supporting this ordinance. And I'm not going to be threatened. And I'm not going to, accept promises of, if this doesn't pass, blah, blah, blah. Okay. So, you know, I just hope people don't sell out. That's all I'm going to say. Thank you.
Ms. Farrell.
Thank you, Mr. President. After a great deal of thought, I've decided to vote present on this ordinance. There are a few people that I respect more than Councilmember Mike O'Brien. There are compelling arguments on both sides of this issue. I understand the arguments of Councilmember O'Brien and of the neighbors that live close to the properties. I also understand that Colvin Avenue is a valuable commercial corridor for Albany and for our city's finances. Commercial properties bring in more revenue. It's also one of the few walkable places for my constituents. I represent directly across the street. Ultimately, I believe in process, and while I acknowledge there are many mistakes in the USDO, I'm not convinced this is one of them. I have had outreach from constituents on both sides of this issue, some concerned about losing the character of our neighborhood, and others wanting more businesses to have a more walkable community. For a lot of my ward, there's not a lot of walkable places. The Colvin Avenue corridor is one of them. Ultimately, I'm not comfortable voting yes on this, but I'm also not comfortable voting no. I do know that the ideal process for zoning, this is not the ideal process. I value that we have this opportunity, but I also don't feel that this process is the ideal. And I don't blame Councilmember O'Brien for this at all. In fact, I share much of his frustration that we've had over the years with the planning department and specifically with the leadership of the planning department. And I look to the leadership of our planning department to work with the council in a transparent and open manner, to work with our constituents so we feel heard, so our constituents feel heard, so we don't have to go through this process again. If we had confidence in our planning process, this ordinance would be unnecessary. I am heartened that the planning department decision to reject a project that was clearly did not fit with the neighborhood was rejected. So we'll be voting present in the hope that a collaborative process will happen in the future. A quick note, just in light of what Councilmember Hoey said, this is absolutely not a sellout on my part. It is listening to my constituents on both sides. It is spending a lot of time looking at this process. There has absolutely been some political pressure applied to me. That doesn't matter to me. I say to my constituents openly, I am somebody that looks at facts. I will look at different sides of the issue, and that's what I've done in this situation. And ideally, the planning process should work. Council members should not feel that they have to go to this process to have their voices heard. And I'm hoping that we move forward with a working planning process. And I'm hoping that the leadership of planning hears this. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Farrell. Mr. Onani.
Really well said, Majority Leader Farrell. Serving as a councilman, I cannot help but be amazed at the amount of investment that is being made in the city of Albany. For a city that many at one time dismissed as one in decline, Albany has attracted firms, developers of all sizes who see the value of doing business in the capital city. Even with the economic crisis caused by COVID-19, people still want to develop here. People want to set up business in the city of Albany. However, the economic miracle that Albany is experiencing right now is at risk, not because of a fundamental economic shift, but rather due to a persistent coalition of residents and organizations who declare any announcement of any business or any development not in my backyard. We have people who want to invest, build workspaces and development in the city of Albany. They want to contribute in the city of Albany, even with all the violence and activities that's happening in the city of Albany. People still are optimistic and see the value and the potential of investing in our city. There are people who want to contribute to our tax base and bring jobs to Albany. But this small vocal group of coalition continues to call for rejections after rejections of development, any projects. I mean, what we're voting on started because there was discussions about having the stewards at that location. It wasn't even announced, it was a thought. And now individuals want to change the current use, which is a mixed use, into multifamily. Something that we have not witnessed in all the years in the city. The facts are, Albany had seen more traffic on the streets and a larger population in 1950s than it does today. Albany also had a larger tax base during that time. There are some of my colleagues who say, well, during the census, let's try to encourage people to get to 100,000 so we could get into a different tax bracket, and that we'll get more funding from the federal government. Everyone is moving towards a walkable neighborhood. The council member for the 13th Ward said it. Individuals want to walk to the local businesses, the local shops, and walk back home. And that's why the Pine Hills neighborhood is the envy of the city. Individuals are able to go to CVS, Stewart's, gas station, library, restaurants. That is what promotes vibrancy in urban settings. The reality is that these projects are not beyond the capacity of a mid-sized city like Albany. If anything, it's going to demonstrate the progress our city is making this comeback towards the post-war peak. Now, look, I understand that not every project is a good fit. And I'm talking about project because that's what this is about. This is about preventing a commercial entity from being at that location. That is what it's about. Because if it wasn't about that, we wouldn't be here discussing this project. Individuals purchase homes so they can invest. And when they purchased the home, it was classified as misuse. And now individuals want the property owner is looking to sell their property, and residents are saying, no, you cannot sell it at what the city of Albany categorized your property as mixed use. Now it's understandable, like no project is a good fit. And there's some businesses that are not good fits for certain neighborhoods. But that's why we have a planning board. That's why we have a zoning board, as well as opportunities for the public to comment on any development or solicit any feedback. We are putting the cart before the horse as relates to, even if this was mixed use, there's no certainty that the project will approve as relates to any commercial property. Now let's talk about the facts about this, what we're voting on. The planning board cannot get a second to change the zoning. The board agreed that it should stay as a mixed use. 1057 and 1061 Washington Avenue have been mixed use forever. I'm not sure where we're getting this information that's been mixed use since 2017. They had a doctor's office, a dentist's office, they had an insurance office, they had food brokerage office, they have off-street parking for all cars. Let's be clear, no other building on Washington Ave has more off-street parking than 1057 and 1061 Washington Avenue. 1057 and 1061 are within 100 feet of Coven Avenue. And I travel to Coven Avenue every Saturday morning. 1057 and 1061 were mixed use like many of the houses in the neighborhood. But unfortunately, some of those houses are no longer there. And I heard some of the advocates who are against this project talk about what type of precedents are we setting? What type of policy are we setting by voting in favor of this? This is a bad public policy to change zoning to keep any future development before a project is even announced. What message does that send to anyone who wants to invest in the city? What message does that send to anyone who wants to start a business in the city? That when you have an idea to come forward, individuals could change the property from mixed use into MU to prevent you from starting your business. We should be happy that individuals want to start a business in the city of Albany. Unemployment rate in some communities as high as 22%. We need diversity in our neighborhoods. We need walkable communities.
If we let this small coalition continue to get in the way of progress, Mr. President, Albany can kiss goodbye the revival and investment it has received. And with that, it can kiss goodbye all the associated benefits like extended tax base, job growth, and increasing availability of housing. Housing is an issue in the city of Albany. And I will say this, with the development that we're witnessing and individuals who want to invest in our city is a sense of hope. These individuals could go to any other neighborhood, any other town, and they are, Mr. President. When we stop development in certain neighborhoods, they don't say, okay, let me go to the lower wards, or let me go to the upper wards, or let me go this way. They are moving out of the city. It's essentially discouraging them from wanting to invest, and the word gets out. Mr. President, in the Pine Hills neighborhood, Hudson and Hamilton, if you look at some of the houses that's happening, I don't want to discourage individuals who want to develop in those communities. And when we deny development in certain neighborhoods, we essentially rejecting it citywide. So, Mr. President, I urge my colleagues in government and my fellow residents to reject the notion that development or any big commercial business is a bad thing. We cannot let the perfect be the enemy of the good. If we want to see a brighter future for the city of Albany, Albany must welcome development and not stand in its way. Mr. President, buying a house is a risk that one take. If you purchase a property and it's zoned as mixed use, and years later, individuals want to say, from government say, well, we made a mistake. Well, are you going to reimburse me all the taxes that I've paid during that time? This is what we're discussing, Mr. President. So I will be voting no. I believe that this city is moving in the right direction, and these actions and resolutions and ordinances rejecting any big development or any commercial space is sending the wrong message. It's sending the wrong message. I know many of my colleagues are homeowners. Put yourself in that individual's shoe, that when you bought a property under the auspice that it's a mixed-use property, and 20, 30 years later, city government come and say, no, we made a mistake. So therefore, you should be punished for it. Mr. President, I will be voting no, and I urge all my colleagues to vote no. Thank you.
Mr. Ballard?
Thank you. I just want to make something clear here. This was a very difficult, it is a difficult situation that we're in. I don't like the idea of government telling homeowners, you know, what you purchase isn't what you have. I don't like that. I have a problem with that. But I also have a problem with the fact that government changed the rules for these other homeowners that lived in the neighborhood. Just to be clear, and to be clear, I've done some research on this. I spoke with homeowners. I've spoken to the councilman. I looked at the records. I requested maps from before 2017 to look at what it was zoned as. I went to a neighborhood association meeting where I sat and just listened to hear what residents had to say. People who live in that neighborhood had to say, and I just want to make sure the record is clear. Before 2017, these properties were not mixed use. They were office use. So they were able to be used for residential or for office use. So if you wanted to have a real estate office or a small office, you were able to do that. In 2017, with the wonderful USDO that has really, unfortunately put homeowners against homeowners. And that's not right either. It was changed to mixed use, which allowed for a much larger footprint or a much larger impact on that community. I don't like the position that we're in. I don't like the idea of us having to go in and go back. I would like to go back to what it was in 2017, because then the property owners have the office use, which under the new zoning, they have mixed opportunities to use it. It'd only be able to be used if they lived in the property, and they don't live in the property. So they wouldn't be able to use it with, in that manner. So I don't appreciate that. But I also think that you've got to look at the other property owners who live in that area, who live in that community. When they made that their home, they thought that they were buying properties that were near office commercial, not mixed use. And this is not against Stewart's, okay? I just want to make sure that's clear too. I love Stewart's. You know, at my wedding, we didn't cut cake. We scooped Stewart's ice cream, because that's how much Stewart's I enjoy. You know, and after this meeting, I'm gonna go eat some Stewart's ice cream, because that's how much this meeting can be a pleasant experience. So my point being is, I think we need to be fair. We need to be fair to the neighbors in that community. And I don't like this any more than anybody else. And I wish we weren't put in this position. And I agree completely with Councilwoman Fahey. She's completely correct. USDO has put us in this position. The planning department has put us in this position, and they've given us no option but this. At the planning committee, I asked, what other options could we do so we can try to bring it back to how it was before, prior to the USDO? And they didn't have any alternative options for us. So I'm going to support this. I'm doing it not with a open heart. I'm doing it because I feel we have to be fair to the neighbors. We have to be fair to those individuals who did not buy and who did not think they were moving into mixed use. So thank you.
Mr. Kimbrough.
Yes.
Kimbrough?
Thank you. Can you hear me, Mr. President? You can. Okay. Yeah. So I will be voting no on this. My problem is that Stewart's. This all, for as much as folks are saying it's not about Stewart's, everybody mentions Stewart's, and so it's again, I have taxpayers in my area that would love for Stewart's to be there in order to take some of the tax burden off of them. That's one. Those houses are as close to Colvin Avenue as they are Rosemont, and I'd argue the argument folks are making that line that planning drew in doing this. To me, it's logical. I mean, it almost, if they didn't draw the line right out to Washington Avenue, it would have kind of created a carve out with those two houses in it, which may have prevented a perfectly square lot to develop on. I'd argue, with the exception of those two houses, the whole block abuts commercial property. I mean, albeit some parking lots, but it's already there. They're actually in the minority. They're the two houses that are there at the end of the block. And also, it's Washington Avenue. They're right next to Washington Avenue. That's a multi-lane street with the traffic flowing there. I mean, it just, again, with all due respect to Mike, who I love, and the residents, and them not wanting this to be there, I can't I can't support this, because I see a lot of reasons for it to be commercially developed. So that's my 2 cents. So
Thank you, Mr. Kimbrough. I thought I see Mr. Robinson's hand up. Mr. Robinson?
Oh, yes. Thank you, Mr. President. And so when weighing this decision, I thought about when you think about commercial, when you think about business, then you think about, families who have to live there and raise their children there and spend their time there. And they've invested their resources. And then you have a business who is in the area, who was previously zoned as Michael Bryan has said, as an office use. Now the use has been changed. I have to typically side with the residents who actually live there and who actually spend their every waking moment in that place, because as some of the council members mentioned previously, that when they invested in this piece of property, when they invested in their home, they invested it in their home in context of what the existing space was and where they invested. So I will be voting yes on this.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Robinson. Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. President. I've listened to everybody's points and people have made some valid points. But one thing that I would like to say about stewards is they have been very supportive to the Albany community. I work at an elementary school, and we had a stewards that was 2 or 3 blocks away. And they were very instrumental in supporting our efforts. And when I'm listening to people talk about kids, I can't recall a kid ever being upset about a stewards being in his neighborhood. And I think that if this project was to come to life, many people will be enjoying a stewards being in their neighborhood, even though this isn't about a stewards. But like it was said before, stewards has been mentioned continuously. So I will be supporting this. And I listen, I hear change is coming, and it just seems like in certain situations, change is resisted. And it's hard for me to understand it all the way around when we look at the faces. Listen, Councilman O'Brien is a fine gentleman. I've learned a lot from him in the 3 years that I've been around him. But we got to look at the practicality of what we're talking about. If anybody is familiar up there, that gas station is pretty much standing on its last leg, and they're going to be looking for new and improved locations. So I will be supporting this, and I just have to think about the support that stewards as a business has been providing the city. And in the second ward, we would welcome the opportunity to have a stewards in our ward. So thank you, Mr. President.
Any further discussion?
Derek, just point of clarification, it's a no vote. It's not supporting the legislature. Okay.
Thank you. I knew I said I will not be supporting. So
thank you. I just wanted to.
Yes.
No other further discussion? Mr. Nani, please don't jump in. Please ask to speak with the chair before you do that.
I apologize.
Thank you, Mr. Nani. Mr. O'Brien.
I appreciate that people have different points of view on this, and I respect everybody on this council, no matter how you happen to vote on this. This was a petition from the neighbors. I am bringing it to the council, and I agree with it. I think some of the arguments we heard here tonight were very exaggerated, particularly Councilmember Anani seems to be saying that we're all NIMBY, which I didn't hear in any of the comments tonight. And I think every one of those neighbors that submitted a response like walkable neighborhoods. But I can assure you that the size and scale of this stewards was not a walkable destination. They insisted on 8 bays for selling gasoline. Had they limited their land to, let's say, a convenience store, such as some of the ones that they've closed in Albany, like the one on Morton Avenue, had they been seeking a true walkable location as a convenience store, it would have passed. The board, I believe, would have passed it from everything that they said. And it would have provided sufficient separation space from the other residential properties. But this was definitely a project not designed for walkability. This was a project designed for cars, and lots of them. And the stewards folks admitted that. Now, we're not talking about, well, we may be talking about few stewards because we don't know whether they're going to appeal the board's decision and be right back here wanting to do it all over again. That may very well happen. But whether it's stewards or whether it's somebody else, I think the neighbors had a very legitimate concern. And some of the, Wusu, you were wrong when you said it's been mixed use for 30 years. It's been mixed use for 3.5 years, maybe not even 3.5 years. It was allowed as a use commensurate with a residential neighborhood, like the office, like the doctor's office, like the daycare center, like the midwifery center that currently is in that whole strip of Washington Avenue. But, you know, I think to paint with one brush, one broad negative NIMBY brush, that everybody who questions development is NIMBY is unfair and unwise, because not all development is necessarily good, as we know very well, because we have a developer who wants to take a chunk of Westland Hills Park, and that's damn wrong. That's not good. In fact, that defeats the whole purpose of enhancing neighborhoods and making them walkable. So I think every project deserves to rise or fall on its own merits. And I think it's very bad to paint as NIMBY, to paint with a broad negative brush, everybody who just spoke on this one project, that they're anti-walkable Albany, or that they have to be NIMBY, or they wouldn't have said that. I think they spoke honestly, and I think they spoke well. And I agree with them that I think it was a mistake that these properties, which have always in fact looked residential, got painted into the mixed use neighborhood center. Now, Alfredo made a very good point. If we reverted back to commercial office, Gary wouldn't be operating his real estate business or whatever else he's had there illegally. He would be able to rebuild the house if it caught on fire. That may be a good idea, but when I proposed that to the planning board, they said, oh no, that's a category that we've discarded now and forever. So to me, I think it's fair. I appreciate people have different opinions. That's the nature of being a council and having open discussions. But I think we have to be honest, and we can't say that, well, damn it, these people are being NIMBY. They always oppose development. They do not. And that it's been mixed use for 30 years, which it has not been. And in fact, even the owner didn't realize the potential consequences that this zoning change has for him. So I would say I encourage people to vote for it. Obviously, it needs 12 votes. I'm not at all certain that we will get that tonight, but I think it's the right thing for me to have listened to the neighbors, drafted this up as an ordinance, and brought it for the whole council's attention. Because I don't think this is the last time that we have to take a look at some of the big developments that are happening, and maybe are they not quite so suited. I mean, we have a development on Calvin Avenue, which, as you know, from the letter that was sent to Chris Spencer, they were passing waivers galore. And, will we say that we're just simply anti-development, anti-walkable because we want to keep our park a park, or because we want to keep green space, or we want to keep landscaping, buffering and screening as landscaping, buffering and screening, not as somebody's roof. So I think it has consequences well into the future. But I do appreciate the discussion, and I appreciate every single one of you. I think you've given it some consideration. I but I must disagree on some points that have been made tonight. And I am going to continue to call it for a vote, even if it fails. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. O'Brien. And if anybody saw me chuckle, forgive me. I've been being frozen in and out this whole time. So if I get frozen, Mr. Kimbrough will take over. First time I've ever had this issue being on a council meeting. But with that being said, can the clerk please call the roll?
If all members will unmute themselves. Anani,
No.
Ballerin,
Yes.
Conti,
Yes.
Doesschate,
Yes.
Fahey,
Yes.
Farrell,
Present.
Flynn,
No.
Frederick,
Yes.
Hoey,
Yes.
Johnson,
No.
Kimbrough,
No.
Love,
Present.
O'Brien,
Yes.
Robinson.
Yes.
So it's 8 in the affirmative, 4 noes, 1 recusal, and 2 presents.
Ordinance does not pass. Mr. Kimbrough.
Thank you, Mr. President. Rest of the ordinances on the agenda are held.
Thank you. Continuing on down for our agenda on resolutions. Resolutions introduced, Mr. Hoey.
Thank you, Mr. President. I noticed resolution 12.21.21 and ask for its passage.
Thank you. Can the clerk please read the resolution?
Resolution thanking the New York State Department of Transportation for honoring the Stockbridge Muncie Mohican Nation mural agreement.
Any discussion on the resolution? Hold on, Mr. Igo has his hand up. Mr. Igo?
Just a point of information for everybody. I was going up the Northway today, and the first mural is up on the first side of the bridge going north, and it looks pretty. I don't know if they put color in it or whatever. It just looks like carving into concrete right now, but it's going to be pretty nice, I think. I'm glad things worked out.
You just said that in the comments, Mr. But thank you, Mr. Igo. Go, Mr. Hoey.
Yes, I just hope everybody could support this. We did work behind the scenes. Originally, this resolution was to try to get some kind of progress. It was a stalemate for a number of years. So I would appreciate everybody thanking the people involved in making sure that this got through. Thank you.
Ms. Farrell.
I wanted to thank our representatives, Assemblymember Fahey, but I also wanted to thank Tom Hoey for pushing this and for kind of making sure that it actually happened. So I'll be a proud co-sponsor of it.
Thank you, Ms. Farrell. Mr. Onani.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just want to thank everyone that was involved in, reversing the decision and making sure that, this mural was done. And I want to thank my old friend from the 15th Ward, Tom Hoey, for his leadership on this resolution. Thank you, Mr. President. I will be supporting this and co-sponsoring.
Seeing no other further discussion, can the clerk please call the roll?
Everyone is a co-sponsor.
Oh, they are?
Yes.
So if everyone's a co-sponsor, we can do this by a voice vote. If everyone unmutes themselves. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
There's no opposed because everyone's co-sponsor. Resolution passes. Continuing on with resolutions introduced, Ms. Farrell.
Thank you, Mr. President. I noticed resolution 13-21-21R and ask for its introduction.
Can the clerk please read the resolution?
Resolution of the Common Council consenting to the elimination of one full-time position and the creation of another, which will affect the salary total for the 2021 budget, Office of Human Resources.
Mr. Kimbrough.
Thank you, Mr. President, to referral to finance.
Thank you. Continuing on with resolutions introduced, Mr. O'Brien.
Thank you. I noticed resolution 142121R and ask for its passage.
Thank you, Mr. O'Brien. Can the clerk please read the resolution?
Resolution of the Common Council regarding the status of Anthony Street as a portion of Westland Hills Park.
The discussion on the resolution, Mr. O'Brien.
Yes, this has become important because the planning board recently issued a decision that would allow a private developer to have access directly onto Anthony Street. And the rationale that was given to the planning board by Dan Hirschberg, he was the only expert, was that it years ago was marked out as a right-of-way for a city street. In fact, the whole park was marked out as a right-of-way for a city street. But the way the park progressed, it was developed on the western side first as a Little League in the 1960s. And in 1974, it was developed on the eastern side with an ordinance of the council appropriating a significant sum of money to design the eastern side of the park, the tennis courts, the playground, the pool, and the pathways, the parking lot, and pave an entrance into the park from Calvin Avenue. Now, subsequent to the planning board's decision, this whole issue was raised with Chris Spencer. He kind of summarily dismissed it. Hyde Clark wrote a very detailed brief, a legal brief, having shown the research that at least in 1974 and even in actions afterwards taken by the council, it appears the council always intended that entrance to be a park. In fact, it never bore a street sign, it just bears a park sign, and that's the only dead ends right in the park. So we felt it was pretty significant. The problem is there is a time frame on appealing this, and if it is not declared as park based on the ordinances and its history, then there's a provision that allows the controller to make determinations of parkland alienation, and that's a whole process unto itself. So what we're doing is asking that this question be sent to the New York State Controller to make such a decision based on the evidence that we've been able to come up with and what he can, because some of the records are still sealed to us, although we believe we have enough in the council ordinances to indicate, what those sealed records would contain. So I'm asking support on this. It may happen that we don't have a lawsuit because since Hyde has been vigorously pursuing this, Corp Council has started to talk with us, mainly the Upper Washington Avenue Neighborhood Association, and we may come to a settlement, both on the park alienation and on whether they violated their authority in determining that a green roof constitutes landscaping, buffering, and screening. And by the way, they never submitted any written traffic study. It was all based on a verbal okay. So I ask for your support on this. I would appreciate it. And we're not anti-development, we're just smart development.
Thank you, Mr. O'Brien. Seeing no further discussion, can the clerk please? Oh, you have your hand up, Mr. Onani?
Yes, sorry about that. I was just like, I would just want to I'll be voting present, but I was for the sponsor, is there a way we could send this to the Secretary of Interior for any type of decision? Will you be open to that? Just to kind of, would that be?
If we want to send it to him, we could send it to him too.
Yeah,
but when we were looking at New York state law, the controller has issued decisions. He has the authority to do that on various times when park alienation became a question. Or of course, always we could go into New York State Supreme Court, but that's expensive and laborious. But if necessary, you know, we would have to. But this seems to be a simpler way, and particularly if the Corp Council ultimately decides that it needs to go back to the planning board for a rehearing on this issue of park and green space and traffic study, you know, that would be great. But unfortunately, we're caught into timeframes that we have to work under. And one of them is the statute of limitations. But yeah, we could send it to the Department of the Interior. I think we'll get a quicker response from the controller, but no harm in doing that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. O'Brien. No other further discussion. Can the clerk please call the roll?
Anani,
Present.
Ballerin,
Yes.
Conti,
Yes.
Doesschate,
Yes.
Fahey,
Yes.
Farrell,
Yes.
Flynn,
Yes.
Frederick,
Yes.
Hoey,
Yes.
Igo,
Yes.
Johnson,
Yes.
Kimbrough,
Yes.
Love,
She there? I don't, is she on? I don't see her. Okay.
O'Brien,
Yes.
Robinson.
Yes.
13 in the affirmative, 1 present vote.
Thank you. Resolution passes. Continue on to resolutions introduced. Mr. Nani?
Yes, Mr. President. I noticed resolution 1521R asks for its passage.
Thank you. Can the clerk please read the resolution?
A resolution to honor Black History Month and the contributions of African Americans and directing the mayor to raise the Pan-African flag on City Hall annually in solidarity.
Is there any discussion on this? Mr. Nani?
Thank you, Mr. President. Black History Month began in 1926, over half a century after the 13th Amendment abolished slavery in the United States, and grew out of the Negro history. The creation of noted historian Dr. Carter G. Woodson and other prominent African Americans, and many African Americans lived and toiled and died, and never achieving the recognition those individuals deserved. But yet they paved the way for the future generations to succeed. Dr. Carter G. Woodson started, "We have a wonderful history. If you are unable to demonstrate to the world that you have this record, the world will say to you, you're not worthy to enjoy the blessings of democracy or anything else." The contributions of African Americans from all walks of life and their endeavors to learn and thrive throughout history and make unforgettable marks in our nation history is one that we should all be proud of. African Americans throughout American history have paved the way for our country to be a beacon of hope. We've had African American artists, scientists, educators, business people, influential thinkers, members of the faith community, athletes, political and government leaders reflected in their greatness in the United States. The civil rights movement and a growing awareness of Black identity, Black History Month or National African American History Month evolved to an annual celebration of achievement by African Americans and a time to recognize the central role of African Americans in United States history. This resolution also calls for the Pan-African flag, which was designed and represented the people of Africa diaspora, and as one scholar put it, to symbolize Black freedom. Simply, the African flag colors each have symbols that have meanings. Red stood for the blood, both the blood shed by African Americans who died in their fight for liberation, and the shared blood of African people. Black represented the Black people And the green was a symbol of growth and nurturing of Africa. In the city of Albany, we have a population of 98,000, and African Americans represent 28% of that population. Mr. President, Black History Month is a time not just to celebrate the past, but we also have to look at what we're doing for African Americans, and are we doing all we can to make sure that everyone is living and enjoying the prosperity that we have witnessed over the years and continue to witness. You know, in these times, Mr. President, I've been thinking about Jackie Robinson. And, you know, we think about Jackie Robinson, he wasn't asking to be treated better. He wasn't asking to be treated less. He was just asking to be treated equally. He didn't ask for special cleats. He didn't ask for special bat. He wanted to be treated equally. And when I think about the state of African Americans, we're not asking to be treated better. We're not asking to be treated less. We're just asking to be treated equally. We see what happened on January 6th, particularly the insurrection that took over the United States Capitol. It shows that we still, as much as we have made progress, we still have a long way to go in fighting for equality in our society. Mr. President, in these times, I ask my colleagues that while notable African Americans like Dr. King get the recognition that they deserve, take this opportunity to do some research on other African Americans that you would not read in the history books. Some people are even local right here in our city. Mr. President, symbols matter, and this month is Black History Month. It's Black History Month every year. It's Black History Month every day. Black African Americans are achieving every year, every day. And I just want to thank all my colleagues for co-sponsoring and continue to support. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Any further discussion on this resolution? Seeing none, since you're all co-sponsored, we will do a voice vote on this. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Resolution passes. Mr. Kimbrough.
Thank you, Mr. President. I make a motion that we add resolution 162121 by majority consent.
Is there a second on that motion? There's a second by Ms. Doesschate. Thank you. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion passes. Ms. Farrell.
Is that for the MC?
Yes.
I'm sorry.
Yes, sir. It's for the MC.
Okay.
Ms. Farrell?
Thank you, Mr. President. I notice resolution 162121R and ask for its introduction and passage.
Thank you. Can the clerk please read the resolution?
Resolution approving an amendment to the financing agreement by and among the Albany Water Board, the City of Albany, and the Albany Municipal Water Finance Authority relating to a certain project and authorizing the execution and delivery of certain documents by the city in connection with the issuance of obligations by the Albany Municipal Water Finance Authority.
Thank you. Is there any discussion on this resolution? Seeing none, can the clerk please call the roll?
Anani,
Yes, co-sponsor, please.
Ballerin,
Yes.
Conti,
Yes.
Doesschate,
Yes.
Fahey,
Yes.
Farrell,
Yes.
Flynn,
Yes.
Frederick,
Yes.
Hoey,
Yes.
Igo,
Yes.
Johnson,
Yes.
Kimbrough,
Yes.
O'Brien,
Yes.
Robinson,
Yes.
14 in the affirmative.
Resolution passes. Moving on to continuing on our resolutions held. Ms. Fahey.
Thank you, Mr. President. I noticed Resolution 62120R and ask for its passage in a roll call vote. Thank you.
Thank you. Can the clerk please read the resolution?
Resolution to promote equity in pedestrian safety and mobility by improving snow and ice removal from city sidewalks, street crossings, and bus stops.
Is there any discussion on this resolution? Ms. Fahey.
Okay, thank you, Mr. President. I introduced this earlier, much earlier in the year. Sure, in the December 2019, we had a huge snowfall, well over 20 inches, and the snow never melted, and it went on for several weeks. And just there were ice and snow mounds everywhere, especially at the street corners. So one of the neighborhood associations in my ward wrote a letter complaining about it and just how unfair it is to people who don't have access to a car, and they walk to meet all their needs, whether it's work or the grocery store or school. And actually, just earlier I was looking at the census, the American Community Survey from 2019, and it was saying that out of 28,000 households, that's several people in a household often, 4,000 households don't have any access to a motor vehicle. So these folks have to deal with our snow and ice, and it's often 5 months out of the year, some years more than less, as you know. And it's difficult for people to get around. So whether it's the disabled and seniors, our kids going to school, people will keep their kids home from school if they can't get there safely. So I think we're doing a good job overall with our removing snow from our streets for automobiles, but I think we need to do this, there needs to be equity, and we need to start doing a better job addressing what we're doing for our sidewalks. So I introduced a resolution last year, and the Department of General Services started looking at it. I took a look did a little research and found that a lot of our cities in a more northern climate are faced with this. We want walkable neighborhoods. People come to the city because they can go up the street to the bank or the restaurants and so on. But it's got to be walkable the entire year if you really want to hold on to folks, to live here. So they're taking a more serious look at it. A lot of cities are doing the same. There's pilot projects where the city has teamed up with, Syracuse, for example, has teamed up with their local transportation authority, like our CDTC, to come up with, an area of high-use pedestrian walkways, and maybe contracting out with a private contractor to do the plowing of the sidewalks. And cities across the country in these northern climates are looking at different ideas about how to address this. So I'm really pleased. Our DGS is bidding out, as Mike said earlier, and I guess it's doing a request for application to 40 potential snow contractors, and also looking at equipment. So it's something I think we all have to continue to have conversations about and figure out, these things are so expensive. Where's the money going to come from? How can we make this happen? But it is something we're looking at, and I really appreciate everybody's support on this issue.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Fahey. Is there any other discussion? Seeing none, Mr. Hoey?
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. I appreciate it. Yeah, I definitely support this. I can't bypass a reason to say I wish we had sidewalks up by me so I could keep them shoveled for my neighbors. Just to let you know, I mean, I have a snow blower and I have a little backhoe. When this bad snow hit, I dug out all the elderly people in my neighborhood's driveway, along my block. When I say neighborhood, I should say my immediate block. I really couldn't get out the main road, but you know, I have a Stewart's 4 blocks down right across from the school where I can't walk my son, and I can't walk and get an ice cream cone with him, you know, especially this time of year, because the snowplow will come and it'll get one lane, and one lane isn't enough to walk and avoid getting hit by a car. It's just, you know, the inequity of it, it is bothersome. I mean, the mayor's office has said that they're going to do something maybe in 4 or 5 years, and I hope I live long enough to see it. So yes, I will be supporting this. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hoey. Mr. Anani.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just want to thank the sponsor of this resolution. I believe that as common council members, one of the things that I hear is quality of life issues, right? As much as people like to say, you know, taxes and public safety, one of the things that people want quality of life, whether it's snow removal from the roads, snow removal from the sidewalk, those things are something that's always on the back of my constituents' mind. And I want to thank the sponsor for introducing this resolution, but also looking at it from an equity lens, right? Equity is now a popular term, but it's good to see when individuals not just talk about it, but also passing resolutions encouraging what equity is supposed to look like. So I want to thank the sponsor and our co-sponsor.
Thank you, Mr. Anani. Mr. O'Brien.
Yeah, I'll also be supporting this and co-sponsoring it. And I just wanted to note that we do intend to hold further General Services Committee meetings once Sergio gets his RFPs out and has a package together and can report to us what equipment, what contracted work you might need, and keep everybody fully apprised of not just passing it, but working to make it.
Thank you, Mr. O'Brien. No further discussion. Can the clerk please call the roll?
Anani,
Yes, co-sponsor, please.
Ballerin,
Yes, co-sponsor.
Conti,
Yes, co-sponsor, please.
Doesschate,
Yes, co-sponsor, please.
Fahey,
Yes.
Farrell,
Yes, co-sponsor, please.
Flynn,
Yes, co-sponsor.
Frederick,
Yes, co-sponsor, please.
Hoey,
Yes, co-sponsor, please.
Igo,
Yes, co-sponsor, please.
Johnson,
Yes, co-sponsor, please.
Kimbrough,
Yes, co-sponsor, please.
O'Brien,
Yes, co-sponsor.
Robinson.
Yes, co-sponsor. Thank you.
14 in the affirmative.
Resolution passes. Continuing on, Ms. Fahey.
Thank you, Mr. President. I noticed Resolution 51121R and ask for its passage and a roll call vote.
Can the clerk please read the resolution?
Resolution of the Common Council consenting to the reappointment of Christopher Ellis Jr. to the City of Albany Planning Board.
Any discussion on this resolution? Ms. Fahey?
Thank you, Mr. President. Christopher, this is a reappointment to the Planning Board. Christopher Ellis came before us, and we had a good conversation about the work that he has done on the committee, and people shared a lot of their concerns about different issues with the Planning Board, and Mr. Ellis was very responsive, and we believe that he has done a good job on the Planning Board and is very worthy of reappointment. And he was voted out of committee with positive recommendation, and I would encourage all members to support his reappointment.
Ms. Douschae?
Thank you, Mr. President. I will be supporting, am I muted?
Nope, you go. Go ahead.
I will be supporting this resolution. I did have a supplemental conversation with Mr. Ellis And I think it was educational for both of us. I do feel the need to comment on one of the comments that was made regarding the role of planning board members. These are significant positions, and there is some discretion. My concerns regarding the planning board and the planning department is that there are some issues with the application of the USDO as written. So one of the people commenting was talking about my having, or maybe other people having, issues with the application of the USDO as written. And that's not the issue for me. The issue is I want it applied equally, equitably, across the board to all developments across the city. And there have been some issues that I have raised for which there has not been an adequate response with regard to the legality of some of the proposals, some of the projects that have been approved. It's very important to have a board that is actively looking at applying the law equitably and listening to residents' concerns about it, and more than just scratching the surface, but really digging in and looking at some of the concerns that are raised. And not necessarily on a discretional level, although there is some discretion with the planning board, but also on a real practical legal basis as to whether or not projects are meeting the standards that this body has adopted. The fact that the planning board staff, the planning department staff, is fallible should come as no surprise. We all are. We're human beings. More recently, this body has received a rewritten version of the USDO that is correcting a lot of citations and typographical errors that were made 4 years ago. We have waited a long time for that. We were told that there were no content changes in that document. I have provided members of our planning committee and the leadership with 2 different documents looking at almost all of that document and very clearly showing that there are some content changes in that we were not told about. There's a problem with the red line version, a very significant problem with the red line version that the planning department staff apparently was unaware of the fact that there were so many errors in the red line version, and they presented that to us. We need to ask questions of the planning department. We need to ask those questions, and the planning board needs to be asking those kinds of detailed questions. In addition to having about 15 substantive changes in content that we were not told about, that were not disclosed to us, there's about 20 to 30 continuing typographical errors and citation errors in the documents that we've been provided. I don't mean to be criticizing the planning department. I have long said that 350 pages of a document, you would expect there to be errors. You would expect there to be errors made and maybe some biases to be embedded in interpretations of the USDO in order to push through projects. That is part of their job. That's how they see their job. That happens. We have to do our job in as arduous as it has been in my spending over 40 hours in reviewing that 350-page document, line by line, comparing it to what we passed, making sure that there are no content changes without us being aware of them. My issue is not that there should be no content changes, but that we know what the content changes are and that is fully disclosed before we take any action on any kind of document. I would hope that it would not have been such an arduous task for us, but that's the reality of the situation. I completely understand how it happens, just as I understand how some of the projects might get passed by the planning board without them necessarily complying 100% with the USDO. It's a 350-page document. There's a lot of information in it. We want it to be applied equitably and fairly for every project throughout this city. And we are looking for members of the planning board to do that. I had a very pleasant and healthy conversation with Mr. Ellis with regard to this. I'm glad to support his reappointment. Following that discussion, I have not yet been able to have a conversation with Mr. Hull. I do plan on having a conversation with him tomorrow. I do need to leave this meeting because my husband has a need to use my iPad for Zoom, and he's a little late for that. But I did feel, in light of the public comments that were made, that I need to make these kinds of statements so people understand it's not about NIMBY. It's not about this project or that project. It is, my concerns are that we apply the USDO currently as written. We need to reevaluate some of that, but apply it currently as written and equitably across the city. And some of the comments that are made, I want to say some that are disparaging, not necessarily only of me, but of other people in the community who have expressed these concerns in applying labels. That's not appropriate. We look at the projects, we look at the issues, we study them, we make our recommendations. As you all know, I've been working very hard at moving that USDO through this current phase so we can move on to it. And I'm not thrilled about it, but I don't have a real objection to it. We're having a dialogue about those kinds of things. And it's important to have that dialogue. And it's important for people to be listening to residents in the city. It's important for the Common Council and its role to be respected, and the role of the planning board to be understood and respected. And I've appreciated being able to have some of that dialogue with people. And I want to make sure that the public understands that there's these kinds of issues at play, and we're just looking for the law to be applied appropriately. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Conti.
Thank you, Mr. President. I wasn't expecting to, but I almost want to second everything that Councilmember Doesschate has said. And I really want to acknowledge the work she's doing in terms of the USDO revisions that are currently before the Planning Committee. I don't know what we would do without her, frankly. So that being said, with regard to the two reappointments for tonight, I'll be supporting both Mr. Ellis's reappointment and Mr. Hull's reappointment. I've known Mr. Hull for a number of years before his appointment to the Planning Board. I have a great deal of respect for him and his abilities. But I want to come back to, again, the council's advise and consent role. And I think the Planning Committee meeting on these two appointments was a good illustration of why advise and consent or confirmation process is important for the council, why it's there, and the importance it has, not just, when we consider new members, we look at their qualifications and try to feel some comfort level with their appointment. But when we're looking at reappointments, it's an opportunity, and it's an appropriate opportunity to look back at their record, how their service on the board or commission to which they're seeking reappointment, because now we're looking at how they handle that responsibility. And so it's appropriate for us to ask questions about particular issues or decisions or how they may have applied the law. And the question here is not applying, it's not adhering to the law, but I think as Ms. Doesschate has indicated, sometimes there are interpretations, and you need to look at that and understand that and have that discussion. So, I think to some extent, the two reappointments were not expecting some of the questions that they received at the planning committee meeting, felt it would be a routine, nice to see you. We're glad for your service. Thank you, and we would support you again. And I think both members are going to probably get unanimous support tonight. But it comes back to an issue that I sometimes constantly harp on, and that it's very important for the council to guard its responsibilities and its prerogatives under advise and consent, and not let that simply slip away. I know Mr. Hull's appointment, his term expired, I believe, more than a year ago. Mr. Ellis is also serving an expired term, I believe. I'm not sure how far it goes. It might be for a minor period. But again, I think that meeting illustrated again the importance of advise and consent, the council's confirmation authority, and our ability to hold members accountable, ask questions, especially with reappointments. So just wanted to make a plug for that. We have a lot of work ahead on these USDO amendments, and they're really important, not just for the planning committee, but for this whole council. And there's more work to come after we get this particular phase of it done. But yeah, I will be supporting both appointments tonight. And again, as I say, I think it's an illustration of the importance of advise and consent, and the council safeguard that right that you have and not just let it slip away, which we have with other boards and commissions like the BZA, like the Historic Resources Commission, which is entirely serving, I think, with expired terms, like the Living Wage Commission, which hasn't been appointed yet, and other things. So be on guard. Don't let it slip away. Thanks.
Thanks, Mr. Hoey.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. Boy, Judy and Richard really hit all the points that I would, so I'm not going to delay much longer. I did read Mr. Ellis, the Riot Act. I really had I'm responsible to the people who vote for me, and they come to me and say, what's going on here? We're not being listened to. When the chairman, Al DeSalvo, came up, even admitted that public comment makes no difference in decisions. And I think we were all shocked when we heard that. And I just wanted to make sure I was tough. I was really, really tough, but I am going to be supporting both of them. Being tough, I also know that I sat in a meeting from 6 o'clock to almost 11 with the planning board, and they did their duty, and that was a long night. So yes, I will be supporting them, but as Richard says, we have to stay on top of them and let them know that they do report back to us when reappointment comes up. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hoey. Mr. Johnson?
Yes, I would just like to say that, I was a part of some of those questions in the beginnings, and, I just would like to see more consistency. I feel like, I don't want to bring color into it, but a lot of times people get a different type of scrutiny. And, and I was there when Mr. DeSerbo made those unflattering comments, and he was passed, and he didn't have to come back. So like, it's problematic for me because, like I said, I sit back, I watch, and I listen, and it just seems to be patterns. And that makes me uncomfortable because, you know, it's hard for people from our communities to want to be involved in these processes because a lot of times we're not heard and we don't see many people that look like us or sound like us in the process. So to see people receiving inconsistencies with the scrutiny, it's troublesome for me. And sometimes it's hard for me not to have this conversation and not bring it up because I was taken back by Mr. Ellis having to go through that process again, and just wanted to go on record to say that I will be supporting Mr. Ellis tonight, and I just wanted to share that. Thank you, Mr. President.
Mr. O'Brien?
Yes, I want to commend both Chris Ellis and Martin Hall for their excellent decision on the combined properties of 2 Calvin Avenue, 1047 and 1051 Washington. I thought it was a well-reasoned decision. It was a tedious hearing, as many hearings that they have participated in have been. I expect myself to be a named plaintiff in a lawsuit against a decision that they rendered on 60 Calvin Avenue. And for that reason, I think it would be a conflict of me to vote for them tonight. So I'm going to just vote present for tonight. But many of their decisions, I commend them for their time and service. And I wish I was voting for you tonight, but I'm afraid of some of the blowback I'll get in a lawsuit if I vote tonight on a decision, which actually I think you guys were misled on by the applicant's spokesperson. But that's what I think I have to do. So that's what I'll do. But I'm sure you'll get appointed and serve with distinction.
Thank you, Mr. O'Brien. Mr. Ballerin?
Thank you, President Ellis. I think anyone who serves on this board should expect to get some tough questions. We have a board of 5 individuals that are non-elected, that are appointed by elected officials to have to say on all of the development in our city. These 5 individuals are the representatives of our democracy, of our residents. They're the only individuals that, when you're looking at these projects that don't depend on a paycheck, on the city when they're moving these projects forward. These are individuals that are residents, that are giving up their time to serve on this board. And it's a controversial board. We can't say it's not. And like Mr. Councilman Conti said, I don't think that the planning department properly prepared them. I don't think that the planning department made them aware of the environment that they were walking into. I mean, we are going to have tough questions. And I think our residents expect us to have tough questions. And I think we were very fair in the way we expressed our questions to all the candidates. And I spoke to some of the candidates outside of the meeting because I think that's important. I think sometimes we work in these 2 silos, where we're constantly battling, and I think we need to talk to each other more and have these open interactions and have these conversations beyond just the appointment process to address some of the issues and to ask the tough questions. Because one of the tough questions that I want to know is who has influence? Because sometimes I feel like the planning department staff blames the board for the decisions the planning department staff wanted. I think we need to be open and honest about those conversations. And, we should expect those members to ask tough questions to the staff, because they're the only check on making sure that they follow this large document fairly. And that's all we want. And I'll say it every day. I want to make sure Central Avenue is treated just the way Western Avenue. And for the residents, that they ask for something on Central Avenue, that they be giving them same kind of respect as the developers that ask for the same exact thing on Western Avenue. So I think, you know, we should be continuously having conversations with our planning board members and making sure that they ask tough questions of the planning board staff. And we all should be able to go through this and be well versed in it, because if we're not, we're working on a handicap when it comes to the planning board, when they come to us, or when we go to the board. And many times that can be taken advantage of. So I will be supporting Mr. Ellis. I think, you know, he's done a good job on the board, and I look forward to his future service for our city. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ballerin. No further discussions. Can Mr. Nani, you didn't go?
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. I just want to express my support for both candidates, particularly Mr. Ellis, who have been responsive. He's a stakeholder in the community. You know, he's well respected and well regarded in the community with his decisions and his family. As the council member representing the Pine Hills neighborhood, we actually have a zoning board committee that work with the planning board, and you know, Virginia Hammer speaks highly of both candidates. I've known these individuals personally, so you know, there's nothing wrong with tough questions. And I just want to thank everyone for supporting both candidates. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Nani. I don't see any other hands up at this time, so can the clerk please call the roll?
Anani,
Yes, co-sponsor, please.
Ballerin,
Yes.
Conti,
Yes.
Doesschate,
She said she was
Fahey,
Yes.
Farrell.
Yes.
Flynn,
Yes, co-sponsor.
Frederick,
Yes, co-sponsor, please.
Hoey,
Yes, co-sponsor, please.
Igo,
Yes.
Johnson,
Yes, co-sponsor, please.
Kimbrough,
Yes, co-sponsor, please.
O'Brien is voting present. Is that
Yes.
correct?
Yes.
Robinson,
Yes, co-sponsor, please.
12 in the affirmative, 1 present.
Resolution passes. Ms. Fahey, continue on the resolution. Ms. Fahey.
Thank you, Mr. President. I noticed resolution number 61121R and ask for its passage and a roll call vote.
Thank you. Can the clerk please read the resolution?
Resolution of the Common Council consenting to the reappointment of Martin Hull to the City of Albany Planning Board.
Is there any discussion on this resolution? Ms. Fahey?
Yes, Mr. Hull appeared before the planning committee and was voted out with positive recommendation. Mr. Hull he's a very experienced, he's a professional planner, and he brings quite a bit of that expertise to his decisions that he makes on the planning board. And as everyone has mentioned, there was a very thorough discussion of some of the projects and cases that he's dealt with on the planning board. So I urge all council members to vote for his reappointment. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Conti?
Thank you, Mr. President. I'll also be voting in favor of this resolution. And as I indicated, I've known Mr. Hull for a number of years, and I think he's well qualified to sit on the board, and I have no problem supporting that. I do want to just indicate with Mr. DeSalvo's reappointment, when he came before the planning committee for reappointment, that was a very contentious meeting. He had a much tougher grilling than either Mr. Hull or Mr. Ellis did. It was like more a cakewalk for those two versus what Mr. DeSalvo got. In fact, the committee moved that Mr. DeSalvo out without recommendation in contrast to a positive recommendation from both Mr. Ellis and Mr. Hull. And when the full council considered Mr. DeSalvo's reappointment, he was nearly defeated. I think, bore the brunt the first time of some members' concerns about application of the USDO. But in my memory, and I think Mr. Hoey, because I think Mr. Hoey was on the other end giving some of the feedback. As I recall, Mr. DeSalvo got one of the toughest, probably the toughest grilling of a reappointment that I have ever seen on the council. So I just wanted to make that notation and set the record straight in terms of how Mr. DeSalvo was handled. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hoey.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. President. Yeah, as an older white guy, believe me, from the bottom of my heart, I do not look at somebody applying for a position and look at them like, the color of the skin, the nationality, or where they're from. I really look at what's inside them. I try to dig inside and see exactly, where they're at. I was tough on all of them. I mean, I was really, really tough on all of them. Mr. Hull made a comment that he wants the city to be homogenous, where every neighborhood looks alike. And yet tonight when the mayor was doing her thing, she said each neighborhood is different. Each neighborhood has a character. So I let Mr. Hull know that. I said, you're approaching it like this, but the residents in these different parts of the city feel a different way. So I'm hoping he really listened. Will he? I don't know. Will Mr. Ellis? I don't know. So I just want to make sure that my fellow council members know I'm always open. You can always talk to me. If you have a problem with me, just tell me. And I'll accept it. And sometimes I realize that I'm an idiot and try to correct my ways. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hoey. Being open. Mr. Johnson.
To my colleague, Councilman Conti, my point was that the pushback for Mr. Al was from the Newark, and the pushback that Mr. Ellis received didn't come from that direction. So yes, Mr. DeSorbo had a rough time, but I think that if the newer council people were supported by the elder, he may have not made it through. And so that's the point that I'm speaking to when I say that someone who coming into this, it was a lot of complaints about. When I spoke to people that dealt with him, they had nothing nice to say. And I've never heard, things like that about Mr. Ellis. So that's the spirit behind my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Seeing no further discussion, Mr. O'Brien?
Yeah, I just want to note that as the oldest council member, I was one of those who did not vote for Mr. DeSalvo, mainly because of the characteristics which were exhibited, not only in the committee meeting, but in the actual planning board process. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. O'Brien. See no further hands. Can the clerk please call the roll?
Anani.
Yes, co-sponsor, please.
Valorant.
Present.
Conti.
Yes.
Fahey.
Yes.
Farrell.
Yes.
Flynn.
Yes.
Frederick.
Yes.
Hoey.
Yes.
Igo.
Yes.
Johnson.
Yes.
Kimbrough.
Yes.
O'Brien, still your intent to vote present?
Yes.
Robinson.
Yes.
11 in the affirmative, 2 present votes.
Resolution passes. That is it for the voting part of the agenda, but we do have, I believe, do we have a Commissioner of Deeds, Ms. Farrell?
Yes, we do, Mr. President. I offer the following names: be hereby appointed Commissioner of Deeds for the City of Albany for the term ending December 31st, 2022, and waive the reading of the names.
Do we have a second on that motion?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. Miscellaneous, I think Mr. Johnson has his hand up. You have your hand up, Mr. Johnson, from last time?
Yes, I do. Thank you,
Mr.
Mr.
Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. President. Shanita Thomas, the young lady that was a victim in the most recent shooting. Shanita was a mother of two, who both of her boys will now grow up without a mother. And unfortunately, Shanita's oldest son was lost to gunfire, to gun violence. The losses that our community and our youth are taking at, are at an astronomical number. You know, the trauma that the city is under. For 3 years, you've been hearing me talk about the lack of programming coming out of Parks and Recreation. For years, years before this administration, you heard community members talking about the loss of inner city football. You heard people talking about the closure of the Livingston Ave Boys Club. You heard people complaining about the closing of Livingston Middle School. We have a situation where our kids have been losing friends and family members. And now, as one of my colleagues said earlier, they're like execution style. Unfortunately, my family knows about this personally. We lost our brother 27 years ago to two gentlemen that stood over him and fired at him, and he didn't have a gun. And 27 years ago, an incident like this was, far and it was a once in a lifetime situation, but now it's becoming normal. I sat in my house last weekend and 20 shots were fired. And every time a gun is fired, every time you hear about a gun going off, anybody that's lost a loved one to gun violence, it just puts a nasty feeling through you. And I just am at a loss because as an advocate for the youth, as a person who has worked with a lot of these kids in our city, I just look at I try to view what their lens looks like, because it's nothing like what my lens looked like when I was their age. And as an advocate, as a person that's sitting at the table, I just say, when are we going to have the real conversation? And the real conversation sounds like this: bail reform is hurting the city of Albany. Not placing some of our juvenile delinquents is hurting the city of Albany. The messages that our people are receiving is that there's no consequences. And without consequences, it dims hope for marginalized kids that, the consistency is not there. What do they have to look forward to? In the state of the state today, what did our kids have to look forward to? Because all you heard things about new residents, you heard things about walkable Albany, and when I hear that, I've been my family didn't have a car. The only way we got around was walking. And believe me, we walked to all parts of Albany. So, when you hear walkable Albany, and then you live in the lower end of the city, it's a lot of things that can be addressed, and they continuously ignored. But we expect our kids to lose, and not digress. Our kid, at one time, the city of Albany was a hotbed for athletes, whether it be football, basketball, sometimes baseball. In the more recent future, the boxing program that was that we have at one time. If you look at it, we have some of the top fighters in the United States on many different levels. And that program is not going in the right direction. So I have to make this compelling argument that it's too much hurt going on in our city. It's not really being addressed. We cannot have gun violence and gun shootings has been on the rise since 2016, long before COVID. We are allowing COVID to be used as an excuse, as a reason why, we should keep moving forward. We have to do something different. We have to have a presence at the Capitol. And when these people are coming to our city to advocate on issues in different parts of the state, we have to have a voice in advocating for what's going on here. Because the changes that they are instituting on us are hurting us. If you look at it, our kids are lost. And on top of our kids being lost, we have COVID and they're not getting the same education that they once were getting. So we have to factor in a bunch of this stuff. We have parents that are overloaded with new issues that are presented from kids not being able to attend school in person. And I just say that Shanita Thomas, I didn't know her personally, but I'm gonna tell you this, I visited the softball field. She was a participant in the girls softball field, softball league up there. I witnessed her graduate from nursing school, always seen her, and she always had a smile. And she was a part of a group of young ladies that were very close to each other, and they supported each other. And they were exactly what we expect from our friends, to be friends to each other. They did everything together. And so now when I see that group, I'm gonna be missing a big smile. And I wanted to say her name tonight because her family just went through this a couple of years ago. What message and what signals are we gonna send to that young man who lost both his mother and his father in the last 2 years? So when I speak about the need for community centers, when I speak about the need for proactive programming, I think that our time is calling for it. And one thing that I will accept as far as COVID is concerned, it's thrown a new wrinkle that we can't do recreation like we used to do. But, our kids are crying out. They need more than what has been presented. And I'm just looking, I see in other cities, they are making moves to address the people. The people called out and they asked for consideration of police reforms. And I just would like to see us be proactive in sending a message that out of all the messages that were sent by the community members, somebody was listening. So once again, it's unfortunate that activities like that happen this week are far too common. And people should be outraged and appalled that the fact that things are like this are happening. So I have to say that we have to do, I don't know what we have to do, but I know that these incidents can't keep on going on. And the only mention of it is through the reporting of the news. We have to figure something out because our kids are hurting. The levels of these acts are going up and up and up. They're getting more atrocious. And when is enough? So I just wanted to say, Shanita Thomas, I want your name to go down in record on record as a terrible tragedy. And I feel just as sad as when my brother got murdered 28 years ago. I never thought that I would be having these type of conversations about this city that I love so dearly. Thank you.
Mr. Hoey, or was it Joe or Hoey who had their hand up? I think it was Joe. Joe, didn't you have your hand up?
Yeah, originally.
Yeah.
I have one question for Kelly. Kelly, we got that 95-page report today. Well, yeah, I guess it was today for the 8th. What do you anticipate doing in, at least in the first meeting? Not to get through 95 pages, a section at a time, or? You're muted.
Yeah, yeah. We have to break it down, but also we got to take some public comment also, because it's not just us, taking all of this stuff in and
So
making a decision.
there's going to be a few meetings on this, I hope.
Absolutely. Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. It's the first of a few. Okay, because we have until April that we just got it. So.
Okay.
Okay.
I wish we had time. I don't know if we had time, but I wish we had a way to try to summarize the 95-page piece. I think that would be the best way, but I don't know if we have time to do that. But we should talk about that, Kelly, figuring out if we can just get a summary of the 95-piece page. I don't know.
I got through 10 pages today, and there's a lot in 10 pages. A lot of
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, and all the different groups are different. I mean, the formatting's different. So it's a lot. It's a lot to get through.
Okay, I just want to know and let people be aware,
Yep. I'm pretty sure that's what most people would like, a summary, but I don't know if that's doable. That's a lot of staff hours, and we have 2 staff members and they're overburdened already. So I know what people would want in the community, but it's definitely tough for us to do something like that. But Mr. Kimbrough, that being said.
If there's no other business, I'd like to make a motion this evening.
There you go.
Okay, that we adjourn. Adjourn
Is there a second?
Adjourn out of respect for Warren Mackey, his loss. It's a big loss to the city. He was a great guy.
Absolutely.
Met him 20-some years ago and just hit it off with the guy. Liked him a lot. So I'd like to make that motion.
Thank you, Joe. All those in favor? Meeting adjourned.